technical or procedural challenges. Additionally, a friendly reminder to all participants to please use their microphone at all times for the benefit of those participating in council chambers and joining remotely. I'd like to now call this meeting to order. And we will start with the land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas. More specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, signatories of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is and will continue to be home to the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action in acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations toward truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. So with that done, do we have any disclosure of pecuniary interest from any member of council? I'm seeing none. That's good. I need a mover for the adoption of minutes, which is 3.1, the regular meeting from December 12th, 2022. I see Councillor Bauer. Any questions on the minutes? There being none, all in favor? That passes. Oh, sorry. That's right. We are voting electronically. That passes. I know, because I didn't go quick enough. Yes, controversial. No, that was a mistake. No, we move on to the consent agenda, and we have a number of items that have been pulled. We have
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have the closed session minutes to be approved as well.
Oh, that's right. It says right there. Disclosure, adoption minutes, and actually I don't have that called to order. I don't have that on my agenda, but sorry, it's on this one here. So the closed session meeting, March 20th, 2023. Need a mover, Regional Councillor Lee. Any questions? All in favor? Vote. Yes, the bugs are here. We're ironing them out. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, now we move on to the consent agenda, I believe. And we have a number of items that have been pulled. I guess I'll read them as 4.3, 4.4, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 5.1. Well, that's actually from the discussion item. Can I have a mover for the balance of the consent agenda? That's moved by Regional Councillor Crawford. Any questions? All in favor? Oh, sorry, vote. That's a fourth mistake in a row on that one. I apologize. I'm just getting used to the electronic if you're watching from home. Okay, but I did vote correctly on that one. There it is. That passes unanimously. Now we move on to the actual items that were pulled, and we start with 4.3, preliminary report on a potential over expenditure from the McLean Community Center pool renovations, and it was pulled by Regional Councillor Crawford, our Deputy Mayor. You have the floor.
Okay, sir.
I just cut you off. I apologize.
There you go.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm in. Okay. My question is under the terminology of potential over expenditure. In my world, it's either is or it isn't. So is it going to be over expended or isn't it?
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Crawford, we've got standard sort of wording that we use in these situations. It will be an over budget expenditure. At this point in time, we don't know what the actual over expenditure will be. So the project manager, Lindsay Sinclair, has been processing a range of change orders based on certain conditions that we're observing in the basement of the McLean Community Center as part of this project. So based on where we're at today, what we do is we advise council that we are going to be over budget on this project. There will be a report upon finalization of the project that will report the actual over expenditure, but it's just to make sure council is aware of sort of where we're tracking and to provide that level of communication.
Okay, so the numbers that we're seeing in the report are an estimate.
Correct,
Okay.
and since the report was prepared, there are some additional costs. It is an active project that we are working on. There are some water main replacement issues that we're dealing with. There's lots of corrosion and piping replacement that's required as we continue with that project. So it is a project that has been challenging from a staff perspective, so we're making council aware at this point in time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, do we have any other questions on 4.3? There being none, moved by Regional Councillor Crawford. All in favor? Oh, sorry. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Next up, we have 4.4, the contract award for San Andrews site improvements, pulled by Regional Councillor Crawford and Councillor Bauer. We'll start with Regional Councillor Crawford.
My question about this is, this project seems to have been delayed a lot. Trying to find a better word, but a lot pretty much covers it up. Seems like it, how close are we after this is done to completing this project?
Through the chair, once we have the contract awarded, we'll have project schedule set up. My anticipated completion date would be mid to end of July.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Bauer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jackson. Easy questions. Is this a vendor that we have used before?
Through the chair, yes, it is. We've had several capital projects with this contractor over the years, and they've been excellent.
Okay, so this is just a one-off situation?
Yes, I certainly hope so.
Okay, good. So now knowing that, I guess my part B question is, are we planning to use them again? Would we use them again after something like this?
Sorry, through the chair, I may have misunderstood the question. Are you referring to the contractor that we're about to hire?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the previous one that
The
we
previous
tried.
contractor, we did not use them in the past. However, I've used them in projects in the past, not with the town of Ajax, and they were excellent.
Okay,
Yeah. So the new contractor is the one I was referring to that has worked with the town for several capital projects.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. So now knowing what happened with the terminated contractor,
Yes.
would we allow them to bid again or use them again in the town of Ajax?
No, through our vendor evaluation, we recommended that they will not work with the town again.
Okay. And is there a process, I'm guessing this would be a vendor that would bid in other municipalities for similar projects, I don't know. Is there a procedure when something like this happens? Does the town take that information and share with its other municipalities in the region? Or do we just keep it to ourselves? Or if we are asked for our opinion, do we give it at that time? What is the process for making sure that this doesn't happen somewhere else as well?
Through the chair, the process includes other municipalities or other owners reaching out for references.
Okay,
And I get that sometimes weekly. And we're asked, and they all have different ways of doing it, but they'll ask us several questions for references, and that's when we give our answers back. So they ask us if we're planning on using them again. My answer would be no.
okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate, in your report, you mentioned that you'll keep the user groups, the neighbors at St. Andrews and the garden, everyone apprised of the updates as the project progresses, and I really appreciate you doing that. So thank you, and those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Are there any other questions on 4.4? Seeing none, can I have a mover for that? Moved by Councillor Bauer, and please vote. That looks like it passes unanimously. Thank you so much. Just a word to our IT staff. getting some messages from residents at home that can't hear the speakers very well. So I don't know if you are speaking, maybe speak closer to the microphone, or I don't know if we can turn it up, but just a little comment. Moving on to 4.5, moved by Regional Councillor Lee, Councillor Henry and Councillor Bauer. We'll start with Regional Councillor Lee. The update to the residential parking permit feasibility studies. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. From you to staff, I guess my question is, so we had two approximate costs on studies, anywhere from $150,000 if you're Whitby, up to $500,000 if you're a large municipality like Markham, Mississauga, or Hamilton. I'm just wondering, do we have approximate times of when those studies were done? Because as we're obviously learning, studies that were done previously may not be equivalent in today's dollars.
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Lee, the Whitby study referenced in the report was done in 2017. So it's an older study, but reflective in kind of the lower end costs for a study of that nature. And the Markham study, around $500,000. That's a current study ongoing with the city of Markham right now.
Okay, and the cost would be relative to the municipality, right? Like Markham is obviously a much larger one, more than double our size. Like I don't know the answer, but realistically, we wouldn't expect ours to be on the $500,000 range from a guesstimate point of view.
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Lee, it could be.
Sure.
Depends on the scope of the study, how much we want to take on, what do we want to leave out, do we want to focus on a particular area. I think the report kind of outlined the various approaches that we've taken over the last few decades. So definitely through the RFI process, we can narrow that down, scope out a little bit further and kind of drill down a little bit further to get that costing more accurate for sure.
Great. And then the report today, this is just kind of receive for information. We're going to go through the RFI process. It's going to come back to council and make an ultimate decision, correct?
That's the objective through the chair.
That is perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Regional Councillor Lee. Next up, we have Councillor Henry.
Thank you. Through the chair, actually, Councillor Lee asked a few of the questions that I wanted to ask, but I did want to follow up with the timeline on this. So for those watching at home, an RFI, there's no cost to the town to put that out, correct? Through the chair?
Through the chair to Councillor Henry, that's correct.
So the timeline on this is by the end of this year, and then we're going to follow through. It could take up until 2 years to have this full process completed. Is that correct? 2 to 3 years?
Through the chair to Councillor Henry, yes, to do the RFI, we can carry out that initiative for the balance of this year. And then if after reporting back, we're directed by council to continue the process, we'd go through the RFP process. And we believe based on the scope, the size of the study, that 2 years would be the approximate time length for a project of that nature to be carried out.
Okay. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councillor Bauer.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions for this item.
I apologize. Next up, we have Mayor Collier.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, we can we can see you. Yes, and hear you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move an amendment and then I'm going to speak to it, Chair. My amendment is to delete item 2, the RFI, and I would just like to speak to that, please. Councillor Dyes and I have been here since 2003. We were here when this started looking at parking in 2004. It's been 19 years that we've been going back and forth looking at options for parking and all sorts of other scenarios. We received a report on this and recommended not to proceed in 2009. Now the ask is to put this out again, to spend upwards of 3 years and upwards of upwards of perhaps $500,000 to look at something again that I really don't think when this comes back, we're actually going to proceed with. or will provide much value to the residents of the town of Ajax. This is similar to the Winrow issue that keeps coming back, and we look at it and pay the money and then we don't go ahead with it. Councillor Henry asked a good question. Is there a cost? Maybe not a monetary cost to prepare the RFI, but if it takes the balance of the year, there's a significant staffing cost to do this. And that's staff time in our department that we've given them a pretty lengthy list of things to do through our strategic plan. And there's other items in here, the transportation report, for instance, it talks about needing more staff in a number of areas. Giving more work for something upwards of the next 8 months to prepare, just to report back that we may or probably not going to. A lot to address the parking issues. We've done our temporary permit system, which we later turned in from a pilot to a full-time system. We've got our waterfront parking. Obviously, our boulevard encroachment bylaw we have changed to allow people to park on our boulevards and widen them, and also our driveway widening policy. So we've created other methods for people to create off-street parking, but no amount of what we're going to do is ever going to address the fact that some people just have too many cars in their household. It's just not going to work. We will be doing this to satisfy, and I've not received any complaints, but we'll be doing this to potentially satisfy a small number of complaints. But I have to warn you, it's a very slippery slope because people don't want other people parking in front of their houses all the time. For every one person you're going to satisfy, you might upset 10. And this is not gonna work out well. So for those reasons, I would like to just not go through the process, not waste anybody's time, just to look at something that we're probably not going to do. I'd like to delete item 2. I feel there's many other pressing matters that we have much higher benefit than to redo a study that's already been done and not recommended. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Collier. So we have an amendment on the floor, and are there any comments or questions on the amendment from members of council? We'll start with Regional Councillor Crawford. You're up.
I'm not going to agree with this amendment. I believe that, well, I don't have a lot of residents' concerns in my ward. We have a large area of my ward that is the village, which has like really, really long driveways. I think it's been heard loud and clear in the newer developments that we approve developments that under the understanding that people are going to use their garage. And I don't care, I don't know how many people are using their garages these days, but there's a large number that are not using their garages, whether they can't fit their cars in the garage or it's added on, like if you've got, I don't know, I think Sterling and I, Councillor Lee and I were talking, if you live in a 4-bedroom home, the assumption is you've got enough room for that many, 2 cars. And one can't fit into a garage. In my house, I have a 2-car garage, and I can't get any of our vehicles in our garage, not because it's full of stuff, but because they don't fit. So I think that we've almost created a problem ourselves in the way that things have been designed. And I don't necessarily think that we have to have a parking system that puts people in front of their houses. I think there are streets that actually it could work as a form of road calming in some situations, because on-street parking does narrow a street. So it could actually work twofold for us in some situations. I think Ward 2 is an anomaly in that it has a lot of the newer developments, and I think that Ward 3 in the, I would say, southeast end of Ward 3 probably has some of the same situations. So, I think, yeah, we have a lot of priorities, but this has been identified as a priority for residents, and I think that we need to be customer focused. And if it's an issue, it's not like Windrows. It's not like that at all. This is a situation that can affect people year round. Windrows, I get it, is like maybe 2-3 times a year. This is a situation that is much more tangible on a yearly, daily basis. And I think that we did a really good job with permit parking. We have a permit system already in place, and I think it's about identifying the correct streets to be able to expand the system. I don't know that we need an RFP. I don't know how it works. I don't know how you identify this, but I think we have a move here to be able to satisfy some residents in their current situation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Next, we'll just go down the line. We have Regional Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So the population in Ajax in 2009 has absolutely skyrocketed from 2009 to 2023, which is where we are right now. I think we absolutely acknowledge there's a housing crisis right now, housing emergency. So what we have is more generations of people staying at home through no fault of their own. So ultimately, you know, I would love to say Durham Transit is there. Our transit commissioner has admitted himself it's not there. We're investing billions over the next, I think, 10 years to finally up our transit. So we know the transit's not there. We know more people are staying in their houses through no fault of their own. And we know some of these driveways are too small. So what is the solution here except to examine a permanent parking system like they have in Toronto, like they'll probably have in Markham, and hopefully I think they have in Whitby as well. I think it's a very prudent step. And to Regional Councillor Crawford's point, it's not just an occasional thing. This affects people year round. And so I appreciate all the steps we've taken up to this point, but to say it's not enough is absolutely an understatement. And yes, I use my garage. We have a 2-car house. I use it, but the minute we have anyone else move into our house, then all of a sudden we are in the same position as many of our residents in Ward 2. So I'm absolutely not going to support this amendment. I think we voted for this back in December. I think it's prudent for us to see the process through. Thank you, Chair.
Next, thank you, Regional Councillor Lee. Next up, we have Regional Councillor Dias.
Thank you, and I'm wondering if we can get the amendment on the screen or somebody read it prior to voting. I think, the cost is significant, particularly in these times when the cost of everything is increasing. So at the end of the day, that won't be the end result of what you see here. You still have to implement it. You still have to have the staff to do that, and obviously the technology to do that as well. And we know that the population's grown here in Ajax, but through the Planning Act, we also know that they're allowed to build smaller properties. So that was part of the problem and always has been. I have only 2 cars that I can park in my driveway. So a third one is not an option, and I understand that. And I think most people understand that when they move in, but they want they want this to change. And it's not a simple change. And a parking system like Toronto, you have a lot of people paying into it. But the other thing Toronto has, we don't have is car sharing. So when that student comes home from university or college for the summer, there are other options if they need a car, and we don't have that. And maybe we should be promoting those businesses, as we see in an upcoming report here in this agenda. And for now, I think, there are certain areas in this municipality where it's more of a problem than others, and maybe that's the solution to looking at other areas first before we go townwide. But I think it's a significant amount of money, and that's just the thin wedge in. And I will not be supporting this. Thank you. I will support the amendment, but not the original.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regional Councillor Dias. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, through the chair. I know that we voted on this before to bring, I believe it was to bring a report to council. And as looking at the homes in Ward 2, we know that currently we're going to be bringing, 17,000 more units into Ajax as per what the province is requesting of us. When you look at homes and take away the fact that garages, everybody talks about garages, clearing out your garages, parking in your garages. What about streets that already exist like Gosselin and Blenting Road and Lynn Street and all the ones up in the northeast subdivision of Castlefield that are row townhomes that back onto others, and they don't have a backyard. So there's no place for them to take their things out of their garage, create a storage unit, and put it somewhere else. And I know that through the winter, we had some issues with regards to parking because they couldn't park in their garages because they couldn't put a shed in a backyard because they don't have a backyard. We are creating a lot of different style homes, and we will be creating a lot of different style homes in the next 17,000 units that are to come in the town of Ajax. And they're not all going to look the same. So when that happens, we have to be prepared to deal with the parking issues that come with that. And the first thing that in my short time on this council, the first thing that I get inquiries as to new subdivisions being built, the first thing that's asked is, are they putting an adequate amount of parking for their guests and for the vehicles that will be in those homes? So, and sometimes, yes, it is about the students coming home and not sharing vehicles, and I understand that is a frustration. But in other times, there's homes that just were not built with backyards to accommodate extra storage for a shed in the backyard. I think this study is very much needed, and I'm going to support it. I can't support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Next up, we have Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to confirm, by removing Clause 2, that means this report is received and filed, and we don't move forward on any further information regarding a residential parking permit program, right? That's correct. Okay, thank you. So I appreciate what previous members of council, going back all these years, have had the information that they have received through the years, and I appreciate their comments. I feel that by not completing this request, we are not, meaning this current council, receiving the information we need to know if this type of parking permit program could be done here in Ajax, regardless of previous information. You know, when it started back in 2004 to 2023 is very different. So I feel I can't make that kind of decision without really getting all the information, which is what we need that RFI and further steps if required. So I will not be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Are there any other members of council with any comments or questions? No? Mr. Romanowski, you're good? Yep. I just want to double check. On the amendment, moved by Mayor Collier that the motion be amended by deleting Clause 2. We need everyone to vote. Thank you. Everybody has voted? Okay, doesn't pass. Thank you. Moving on to 4.6. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Yeah, on the main motion, moved by Regional Councillor Lee. Yeah, all in favor? Vote, please. Sorry. Okay, that passes. Thank you. Now, moving on to, oh, sorry. Mayor Collier, did I make a mistake?
Well, I think I've discovered a flaw in the system. We have no way to call points of order. And
Oh,
Chair's
sorry.
attention, you just did 2 votes with my hand up, wanted to call a point of order and to speak to something.
Just
But anyway, we're past it. We're past it now, but I just ask that you, we're not all there in person, so we need to make sure, because I did have a point of order I had called and it was not acknowledged.
I apologize for that. I did not see you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Nicole Cooper, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a limitation of the system. We did cover it during the training. If you are attending remotely and you need to raise a point of order, you can use the raise hand feature, and that will signal to the chair that you should be prioritized to raise that point of order.
I did that. Madam Clerk.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't see it. I apologize, but yeah.
It's fine. Let's move on.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to 4.6, which is the bus transportation service, and that was pulled by Regional Councillor Lee and Councillor Bauer, as well as Mayor Collier. Regional Councillor Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. It's a great, I have no problem. is there a possibility of expanding this service? So for example, in the report, we mentioned how we provide school break camps, bus service from McLean. So just hypothetically, have we examined the possibility of providing the service from ARC an ACC? Because I'm sure it is a point of relief for any working parent dropping their kid off at camp. You can just drop them off there, get on the bus. It's just makes it easier for the residents.
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Lee. So in the past, we have had before and after camps at all three of those community center locations. While we've seen a great return to our staffing complement this year in 2023, unfortunately, our part-time seasonal staff aren't quite as plentiful as they have been in the past, and we do continue to have some staffing limitations. I'm going to pass the mic over to Allison Kushner, our Community Recreation Supervisor, who put together this report to provide a few further details in terms of the choice of MCC.
Oh, should I start over? Should I start over? No. Okay. Most of our customers who are utilizing the service are the parents that are commuting for work. And we do assess the service every year. So for example, as I mentioned in 2019, we were having 257 customers, whereas currently right now, we only have less than 10 that are signed up for the busing transportation services for the MCC specifically. So I'm viewing this year as kind of our rebuilding year to see whether the service would be good just hosted at the McLean Center, or if by offering at other centers, we might see more individuals utilizing it.
So as we progress each year, hopefully bring back our full complement of part-time staff, I guess the question would be, it's not out of the realm of possibility to expand our service to ACC and ARC as well, correct?
Correct.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Very good. We have Councillor Bauer and Mayor Collier in the queue. Councillor Bauer, you're up.
Hi, good afternoon, Ms. Kushner. So my question is similar to Regional Councillor Lee regarding what services can be provided based on what's on the report. So if they want, so mine would be, if instead of once a week for the Ajax Seniors Residence buildings to the seniors clubs, could that be increased? And or could there be like a shuttle service, let's say, for those same seniors clubs to go to the rec centers?
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer, I'll take this one. Absolutely, there could be opportunity to expand the busing service. As part of the strategic plan, we have identified 2024 to bring forth a report to council to talk about what expanded bus services might look like. Part of those discussions, as you may recall from our planning sessions, include advocating for Durham Region Transit for better bus routes to our community centers. But to answer that part specifically, absolutely can be expanded for further days of the week. Really, that would come down to the costs for the service and then the usership and what type of usage we would see out of it. But absolutely, there could be the option to expand, yes.
Okay, thank you, Director Rita. So the dollar amount in the report is specifically for these services listed only?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, so we'll just have to keep working on it for next time. Okay, thank you. That was my question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Just as I remember this, we are just starting with this electronic, so just a reminder to members of council to put yourself in the queue if you wish to speak, which Mayor Collier has done, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on those. So this is stock transportation. So this is a school bus service. Is that correct, Mr. Vita?
Sorry, Mayor Collier, you're breaking up a bit there. You're asking if it's the school bus service that's
Yeah, it's a school bus type vehicle that we're
correct. Yes.
Okay. Has there been any discussion or looked at, and I believe Councilor Bauer and I brought something up about this maybe last strat plan, about having a town-operated community bus that could be available to all these different groups, plus some. I've been approached by the Hindu organization, for instance, looking for a way for transportation, some sort of community service, rather than contract out. Has there been anything looked at having this internal, having our own vehicle that we can expand the service and give better value?
Through the chair to Mayor Collier, I would say in terms of the review for this particular report, no, that type of evaluation hasn't been completed. However, I would expect as we look to report on busing and any alternate transportation services as part of the strat plan project, that we would consider all available options, and I would consider that as one of the options. Yes, we would take a look into.
Okay, and I don't remember who it was. I did, but I think Councillor Dyes also referred to the transportation plan that's coming up later in this agenda. And ride sharing and other things are options, but I don't see a community bus service there as an option. I'm fine to support this for 87,000. I think it is for this year, but I would like to have that looked at as an option, as a real option for coming years, because I do see some value there. I do see that by having that asset, we would be able to service a lot more of the community, because I know there is a lot more out there. I'm trying to remember the one, not Joanne's House. Somebody can help me with this, but there's a lot of different organizations that have to arrange their own private busing that I think there's a market. So I would like to at least look at that, please. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Good.
Thank you, Mayor Collier. Are there any other questions on 4.6? Seeing none, can I have a mover, please? Moved by Regional Councillor Lee. Please vote. Okay, that carries. Thank you so much. Moving on now to 4.7, which is the Corporate Information Technology Strategic Plan Year 3 update. Are we in the queue? Okay, and that was pulled by Councillor Bauer. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Walker. Thank you for the report. So this was just a question linked to the CityWorks program. I've heard from residents that when they file a complaint or an issue using AppJax, there's kind of like a dual message that AppJax says it's closed, but it's really gone to CityWorks, and CityWorks also says it. Like it's a confusing message that residents get, so that's why they contact us. Can you please explain that, and is there a fix for that?
Yes, through the chair. You guys hear me okay? I believe it is. Yep. Green
You
light's
can
on.
just get as close as you can to the
Okay.
mic. We're just still working out the levels. Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Bauer. So the reason why that is happening simply is the two systems aren't integrated at this time. So anything submitted through AppJax is then manually input into CityWorks. And both systems have a notification, if you will. So it's not one seamless, continual process. The solution to that would be with our upcoming, the CRM we'd be looking at, in that anything we are intaking would be integrated with CityWorks as an example, and you'd have one communication channel back and forth. So really until that time, it's likely that the multiple notifications would continue.
Okay, thank you. So then the message that is sent out by, I'm guessing AppJax to say it's closed, is that a template? Like, can it be changed? Can the wording be updated? Because I think it's very confusing. Is there a way to really market that your issue is not finished? It's just moved over, like just a more clear message.
Yep, through the chair, it should be. Actually, I don't know right now, but I don't see why we wouldn't be able to take a look at that. I know that's something we haven't looked at, so we can certainly look at tailoring the message to, I don't know what it says right now, but we can look at it and say this has been sent to CityWorks, or come up with something that makes more sense, yes.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very much. And That's my only question. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. So on 4.6, we need, oh, sorry, 4.7, we need a mover. Moved by Councillor Bauer. And please vote. Thank you so much. Moving now to discussion, which would be 5.1. We have traffic calming program reporting process. And we start with Regional Councillor Lee. Thank you so much. Again, oh, sorry, there is a presentation on this? There's not? Just a discussion? Okay, very good. So Regional Councillor Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to staff for putting this all together. I think a lot of our residents aren't familiar with the traffic calming process, so it is great to kind of go in depth about what qualifies, what doesn't. I think from a council point of view, it would be very helpful, and I think I emailed this separately, was in Table 1 of the report, you have a list of all the traffic calming locations from 2017 to 2020. In theory, we actually give the roads we get complaints about twice a year. One's for the spring collection, one's for the fall collection. I think what would be very beneficial in April or possibly just in an email to us is to give us a list of roads that don't qualify for traffic calming. You know, and that way we can just respond to our residents being like, thanks for your concern. We actually did the data. If you could share as much data as you can, that'd be even better. But just it's a cleaner customer experience, which apparently Councillor Crawford and I keep bringing up today. But if we can just kind of close the loop on their residents and just say, you don't qualify for traffic calming. I think for the most part, that actually solves, I would say, 90% of our complaints of just rather than the same person over and over being like, you're not listening, and just giving that feedback.
We will forward it to members of council for their for the status update.
Oh, am I? And then is that something we can get? Again, I'm not trying to create more work for you. You're incredibly busy. But is this something we can get quarterly, do you think? Or is it like after each collection? Like just from a expectation point of view, just what do you think you can commit to?
Through Chair to Councillor Lee, we, as I indicated in my report, Councillor Lee, once we get access to CityWorks, then we would be able to provide you an update as soon as we are done with the warrant analysis. And not only to the members of council, we will provide an update to the residents as well. And all those, all the information will be included in the CityWorks itself. So members of council, senior management staff, they can look at all those requests and they can keep themselves updated as well.
Perfect. My last kind of question is, at almost page 7 of the report, you mentioned September 15th is the deadline for spring collection in the fall. Is there a deadline for fall collection? I'm someone who likes following rules and order, and just, if you give me a hard date, I will absolutely follow that. But in your mind, is there like a deadline that you could provide, whether it's May 15th, hypothetically? Just in terms of what you do, what is the best date for fall collection as a deadline?
For fall collection, I would say September 15th. And for spring collection, I would say April 15th.
April?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to compile an email in the next 4 days. Thank you very much. Again, I appreciate it. I appreciate the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Regional Councillor Lee. Next up, we have Regional Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm to read this report correct, if you identify a street that needs to be road calmed in September of, let's say, September 2023, it doesn't actually get calmed until 2025. Okay, so I can't tell you, I mean, you know, we all knocked on doors. I didn't get a complaint about taxes. I didn't get a complaint about snow. The only thing I heard at the doors was about road calming. The only thing I heard at the doors, not even lying, is how fast the cars are on the road. If you identify that a street needs to be calmed in 1 year, the expectation from residents is that it will be done no less than a year later. So I don't know what we need to do to speed that process up, but 2 years is 1 year too long. So I need to know why and how that can be sped up.
Through Chair to Councillor Crawford, I think in my report itself, I have indicated that, basically the report was written with a thought process that whichever street we like whatever number of street we receive on a yearly basis, and in my report I have indicated that in 2022 we received 224 complaints from the members of council and residents. Out of 224, 96 requests were related to traffic calming and or speeding. So speeding and traffic calming both goes hand in hand. So we collected traffic data and we analyzed all those streets for traffic calming, irrespective of the request, whether it was a speeding or traffic calming request. So we analyzed all of them. So considering the timeline required for the traffic data collection, warrant analysis process, and all the factors together, it is a bit difficult to expedite the process. However, having said that, based on my thought process, what I thought, if we can get the whole list for that year and get it approved through the following year's budget process, then we can complete the all those streets and we can traffic calm them in the same year. So if we have a continuous funding for traffic calming, then as I indicated on the page 8 of my report, we can prioritize the number of, because the requests that we are receiving, they are huge in numbers. So at the end of the day, with the limited budget, we have to prioritize them. So we can prioritize them based on the available funding. So if any street requires a higher priority in terms of traffic calming, we can expedite them and we can implement them in the next year.
So anything can be bought with more money. That's what we're saying. I want to first say that I mean no disrespect to you or your processes. I understand that this is timely. You received 200 requests. We probably received that plus, right? And I also know that we send you a lot of streets that you have tested over and over again that do not have speeding, right? And so I do understand that, and I appreciate the fact that you are proud. You're out of all the traffic calming people we've had, through no fault of you, you are the most patient, I would have to say. So thank you for that. But I really believe that whatever it is that what you need to speed this process up, we need to take a look at. Again, as a customer-focused council, we have to be customer-focused. They pay for everything that happens in the town. And sure, we all have dreams and visions about what should be happening in the town. But at the end of the day, their taxes have to be shown, they have to show that their taxes are being used for what they believe needs to be done. I think I am 100% in favor of speed bumps. As you know, we have had this discussion before, and I want to visit that. I want to be able to say that we can do this on certain streets. I know you were the guy in Whitby that got it done. So, but all due respect, 2 years is too long. And I get it, the volume, but we need to be able to shorten that timeline up. So I do appreciate all your answers, I do. But 2 years is too long.
Through the chair to Councillor Crawford. Councillor Crawford, we will do our best, but if council allows continuous funding each and every year, then we may be able to catch up with the list that we have, and it's a huge list. So we have to prioritize based on the data itself. So I cannot confirm that we would be able to complete all the streets in a year or two, or probably next 3 years, but we have to prioritize based on the funding available.
Can I
just get back in for 1 second? I just wanted to
Yes.
say, you do work with Road Watch, correct? I mean, we send them tons of streets to look at. We send the police tons of street. I think we just recently, council was asked for one of the DRPS officers for a list of streets that they can look at. So you use that information also to help you with the 200 plus streets you get sent, right? It's not just you doing it.
Through Chair to Councillor Crawford, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mayor Sean Collier.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a big fan of traffic calming because, no disrespect to anybody, it just doesn't work. It's very minimally effective. My question is to Mr. Pandya, what do we do? I think last year we installed 17 traffic calming locations. What do we do after the fact to go back and somehow measure the effectiveness of these installs to see what actually works, what the effect is, and then we can focus our measures moving forward better.
Through Chair to Mayor Collier, we typically collect traffic data in terms of speed and volume for each traffic calm location. We installed traffic calming measures on 13 streets last year.
Okay, so there will be follow-up after the fact, so we can measure before and after data and see what the result is.
Through Chair to Mayor Collier, that's correct. And moving forward, the reports on traffic calming measures will include all the information that you have asked for.
Thank you. Now, one thing we haven't talked about is automatic speed enforcement, which does work and has been scientifically proven to work. Councillor Crawford and I have a motion coming at the next council meeting with regards to automatic speed enforcement, I believe. I want to see that system expanded. The region has recently refunded us our costs, so our cost to operate the system for the last year is zero. I assume that will be ongoing. So if we have you've suggested that we should have ongoing funding for traffic calming. If we now have access to regional funds to cover our costs for automatic speed enforcement that we know does work, why are we not focusing more on that?
Through Chair to Mayor Collier, ASE has different criteria. I understand that the region is expected to provide the funding for it. However, having said that, we have certain limitations to implement ASE or expanding the ASE program because of the processing limits that have been imposed by JPC and the POA courts at the region of Durham.
I understand that, and that's why we only operate our cameras certain hours. But the motion that Councillor Crawford and I have coming removes some of the restrictions on where those automatic speed enforcement cameras can go. So we'll be able to broaden and put them on more streets. The City of Toronto has just doubled their number of cameras. How can the City of Toronto double their number of automatic speed enforcement when we are limited by caps from the same processing facility that Toronto used?
Maybe I can just jump in here through the chair to Mayor Collier. I think they're two totally different mechanisms and programs. I think
Yes.
So maybe we'll leave the ASE discussion for when the motion comes forward. But I think with regards to the traffic calming piece, I think because we're in the kind of a lull from a funding perspective, we're focusing on the 13 traffic calming areas that are in place. We do evaluations of those in-place traffic calming sites through our yearly data collection. And to go back to Councillor Crawford's question about the lag between the time of the assessments to when council has those to be considered through the budget. If there is an opportunity for us to do those evaluations sooner and bring them forward through the budget, then we definitely can do that. I think compiling the list of streets, et cetera, that are part of those discussions, whether it be through Road Watch or through council lists that are provided through communications. We can look at that, but I think we also need to keep in mind that once the program's up and running on a yearly basis, we'll continually have those facilities or areas where traffic calming needs to be done coming through more regularly. So there may not be that 2-year lag that there would be at the onset, but we will work with council to see if we can bring forward those other initiatives sooner. And if we can through that year's budget process, we will.
And thank you for that, Ms. Romanowski. And before I move on, happy birthday today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I appreciate that. And part of the problem, as Mr. Pandya pointed out, is if he's having to go through 200 and some odd requests, it's eating up so much time and we can't get those things put in place. The other piece of this is I don't think they're very effective. So we're burning up a lot of staff time and potential resources putting in traffic calming that really don't have any effect. And I'll use Ravenscroft as an example, kind of the poster child lately of all the work that was done on there and the bollards and everything else. And we get nothing but complaints about it because the residents don't like the bollards. We have to put them in and take them out for snow removal in the winter, and just not real effective. If we were to expand the other program, this is my point, it would free up staff time and resources to maybe address some of these real problem areas. That's the only point I'm trying to make here. I do understand we're going to be discussing ASC later on. I'm looking forward to the next report on the effectiveness, but yeah, I see this kind of like, as I spoke to the RFI before, we're spending a lot of time and effort on something that no disrespect, I mean, the work is important, but we as council can maybe help by not submitting so many things. Like if we know a street has just been looked at, or if we know it's an area that's just not going to be warranted, I would rather just tell the residents, look, I'm sorry, we've looked at this, or this is not going to be warranted. There's already a stop sign here, or a stoplight here, and a stoplight here, and a stoplight here. It's not going to meet the warrants, rather than have staff look at it to come back the other way. We can help in that respect. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Pandya.
Thank you, Mayor Collier. Next up, we have Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Thank you for the report. I just want to go back to make sure I understand when you were answering Regional Councillor Crawford at the beginning of this session. So currently, what is allotted in the budget for traffic calming? Was it $100,000 a year for 5 years or something like that?
If I may, through the chair to Councillor Bauer, we had $100,000 allotted to the budget. I think that took us to 2021 or 2022. There's a lull in the budget this year and 2024. And then I believe it picks back up in 2025 with another $100,000 allocated for those works. But those will be part of obviously future budget discussions.
Okay. So the lull was caused by, was it proposed in the budget for I'm sorry, I should probably know this, but was it kept out or did we refuse it?
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer, it was not put in the budget for this budget or the next budget because we were deploying the 13 facilities as well as going through the revision to the traffic calming warrant, et cetera, as well as balancing as Mr. Mayor raised the ASE program as well as the community safety zone program. So we have a number of initiatives that we were focusing on in these years going forward.
Okay, thank you. So, so the 100,000 funded 13 traffic calming areas. Is that right? The previous.
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer, yes, there was an upset limit of $100,000 allocated to those traffic calming areas. That is correct.
Okay. And if the outstanding 96 requests for traffic calming measures were the same measures implemented, then so 100,000 divided by 13 is roughly 7,700 per installation. So if we did the same thing for 96, when you say continuous funding, are we trying to catch up the 96 times 7,700?
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer, I don't think we're trying to catch up, and I don't think it's fair to assume that all 96 are going to meet the warrant. I think
Correct.
it's just identifying that, I think, a sustainable funding source, whether it be through funding or through staffing or through a combination of the two, would have to be allocated to a program of this nature to ensure we're hitting the timelines of collection in the spring, collection in the fall, reporting, ensuring that we're putting it on the list in the appropriate timeline, as well as reporting to council in a timely fashion when it comes to budget. If we don't use the whole $100,000 within that year, that funding can be rolled over to future years to encapsulate the removal of the sites, storage of the equipment, et cetera, that we use for traffic calming. So it's more of a pool of funds to accommodate that program, if I may.
Okay, thank you. So, and then just to clarify, if there were, let's say a handful of these streets that you determined this year after analysis that they were in need of traffic calming, that is something I think you said could come forward at budget time to ensure that it's done within a year and not 2 years or 3 years, depending on when the request is submitted.
Through chair to Councillor Bauer, it depends on when we receive the request. If the request was received earlier before the month of September, then we would have included those requests into our traffic data collection list, and we can complete the warrant analysis, and we can ask for the funding for the next year. So it really depends on when we receive the request, because it as indicated in my email, it is based on the times of the year, the volume of warrant analysis that we do, and time required for identification and preliminary design of traffic calming measures. As part of the process, we also have to go to the residents as well to get their buy-in in terms of what we have included in the preliminary design. So that also takes some time to confirm that the residents are on board with the proposed changes on their road, right? So it depends. I would say, I cannot, as I said, I cannot confirm that we can get it included in the next year, because it depends on the budget and the priorities that we have based on the traffic data collection list. I would like to also clarify that the 13 streets that we implemented last year, those streets were identified between 2017 and 2020. So all the budgets that council approved, they were combined, and that's how we implemented those projects. So it is not necessary that we can complete installation of traffic calming devices with $100,000 and 13 streets. Based on my calculation, each street requires around 20,000 to get traffic calming measures implemented. It all depends on the type of the traffic calming measures, but probably within 100,000, I can only implement 5 or 6 streets.
Okay.
And through the chair to Councillor Bauer, I think that's an important component that Mr. Pandya had outlined. It's not just a matter of identifying a street and putting it through the warrant and seeing that it meets a warrant. It's that consultation piece with the public and the residents from that street to ensure that they're involved, we're open and transparent, and that they also understand, like council, the type of infrastructure that may be implemented on their street. Is it Is it a bump? Is it a hump? Is it bollards? Is it other pavement marking, signage, et cetera? So we want to ensure that we also go through that consultative process as well, so that residents know what they are getting and when they would be getting it.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much, Director. Thank you very much, Mr. Pandya. That's my question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Are there any other questions? I have a few. Thank you for your presentation and all the work you do. A couple of questions. So if a street isn't marked for a speed limit, then the default is 50 kilometers, correct?
To Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Is that provincially mandated where if I'm in Cornwall, Ontario, or Nipigon, Ontario, or Ajax, Ontario, if a street is not marked, does it mean it's 50? Is that something we do within the region or the town?
Yes, that's correct. It is as per the Highway Traffic Act. Default speed limit is 50 kilometers per
Okay.
hour, so we don't need to install signs on any of our roads if the speed is
Right.
Yeah.
So the only way to get a speed limit lowered is to actually put a sign there. So if a specific street has no sign on it, we'll take example Bray, and that street has no sign on it, I believe, so it's automatically 50.
Yes, that's correct. As per the Highway Traffic Act, if the speed limit is less or more than 50 kilometers per hour, the municipal government has to bylaw that,
Right.
and then the required signage needs to be installed.
Okay, I'm trying to post everything as a question, but it does say discussion. Because if we, as councillors, work with Durham Regional Police and they say we can do some enforcement and education on specific streets, and we say, can you go look at Fletcher, or can you go look at Bray, or can you go look at Sullivan? If the street isn't marked, then it's 50. And then they come back and say, well, technically there's not a lot of speeding because people are only 6 or 7 over. So, I'm trying to not present opinions here, but if you drive 50 kilometers an hour on Bray, it's really fast. It's really fast. So my question to you is, would there be a scenario where we would look at, I know there's over 1,000 streets in Ajax, but would we somehow try and get, like I know, over and above traffic calming measures, just trying to get our speed limits lowered on a lot of these streets so that we could maybe start posting signs, I don't know if that's within the budget, and say, okay, now we, see all these streets that are marginal, maybe they don't quite meet the traffic warrant, but a lot of times they don't meet the traffic warrant because they're, see I'm saying this circle? Is that something that, because I understand you're doing a study overall on traffic calming, would you consider doing that and being more aggressive with posting 40s on most of the residential streets?
I would say that professionally or technically, I would not support reducing speed limits on each and every road. I think it is my understanding that the town has already reduced posted speed limits along the frontages of elementary schools. So I would support, or I would prefer to reduce the posted speed limit along the major pedestrian generators, such as major district parks or elementary schools, hospitals, those sort of areas, rather than the residential street.
And through the chair, to the chair, I think this would be a separate discussion.
Fair enough.
Outside of traffic calming. It may be an element that we might uncover through our data analysis that we get. But I think it would be a separate discussion and a separate process.
Fair enough. Along with the SC, which I'm glad that's coming forward, and yes, big fan of that. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on item, discussion, traffic calming programming, report process, item 5.1? There isn't? Okay. Can we have a vote on that, please? Oh, sorry. There is no votes. This is just discussion, correct? There's nothing received. Okay. Moving right along to 6.1.
Sorry, Chair. There is a vote to adopt the report.
Okay. Can I have a vote to adopt the report, please? Oh, yeah, moved by Councillor Bauer. That carries. Thank you so much. Now, moving on to 6.1. Audley Recreation Center Fairgrounds feasibility study. We have a presentation for that, or are we just going to ask questions? Mr. Clerk?
Yes, there is a presentation.
There is a presentation, okay.
Mr. Chair, just before we proceed, I will introduce the speaker this afternoon. I also have Andrew Jackson in attendance, who was one of the project and staff leads as it relates to the development of this study. As many of you know, the town received is it okay? As many of you know, we received a federal grant from the Tourism Relief Fund as it relates to funding the feasibility study for the Audley Recreation Center and take a closer look as it relates to the hosting of signature or large-scale special events within the town of Ajax. So looking at the Audley Rec Center, one of the principles that we looked at for the larger events, such as a Canada Day, where we would generate approximately 15,000 people, how the Audley Recreation Center could be positioned to accommodate that volume. So we looked at it in two respects. First of all, based on current conditions, recognizing what an approach may be, but also recognizing that towards the back end of the 10-year forecast, there are plans for a third phase of the Audley Recreation Center and ensuring that the facility could continue to function in that capacity. One thing I will say is this focus of this study was geared towards those larger scale events. As many of you know, we do currently host special events at the Audley Recreation Center. We did host Winterfest as an example this past year. So without doing anything to the site, we do have the ability to still host those types of special events, more mid-range. Winterfest, we estimated we had approximately 8,000 people, and it was close to capacity based on the current conditions. So looking at a Canada Day where we would have basically double that size, we would be limited or restricted based on current conditions. So that's really what this study focused on, is looking at those larger scale events. But I did want to be clear with council that, you know, sort of doing nothing, sort of retaining the status quo, retaining the hills that you see in the background here, we still do have the ability to host special events, just limited in size and scale from time to time. So I just wanted to make that comment to council as you go through and hear the presentation as it relates to the Audley Recreation Center. So we do have Jeannie Ng from MJMA. MJMA is the architect that was retained to do phase 1 and phase 2. So Jeannie has been the principal architect sort of through the first two phases and is the one that's most intimately familiar with the site. And I'll ask her to lead us through the presentation this afternoon.
Welcome, Ms. Ng. Can you hear and see us? We cannot see you yet. We're just standing by for the feed from Ms. Ng.
Ms. Ng, you may need to enable your video camera. And perhaps your audio as well. Ms. Ng, in the lower right corner of your screen, you should see two icons, one for a microphone, one for a video camera. If they are red, that means that they are disabled. You'll have to click those buttons to re-enable.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Sorry, Mr. Clerk, go ahead.
I was just going to indicate that yes, we can hear you, Ms. Ng.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Let me just, for whatever reason, we were all set and now we're not. Okay. I don't know why the camera's not working.
We certainly can hear you.
Apologies. Okay, well, why
So
don't I
if you can't
go
get it to
again?
work, maybe we'll just proceed without video.
Yes, okay, let's do that. Thank you, Chair and councillors, for having me here today. As Dave mentioned, this is a presentation of the work we did to see how we might find a new home for major events at the Audley Recreation Centre site. So I wanted to start with this image. I will confess I don't have a lot of experience with the town of Ajax events, so I wanted to get a real sense of the kind of events that you put together, and you certainly know how to put together a show. This is from Ajax Downs. It was July 1st, 2015, and it was a tremendous kind of event, and I think it really demonstrates the sort of remarkable and extraordinary, memorable experiences that these kind of events bring to a community. They are very much about making memories, sharing experiences, and this project or this study is about that kind of social infrastructure. So the site, as you know, we are, and as Dave mentioned, we have experience with the site. We designed Audley Rec 1 as well as Rec 2, and we thought about ARC Phase 3 as well. But the site is more unique than our participation in the building we designed. It's part of the Green Belt, as you might know. And on the northeast corner, it actually is a designated heritage natural heritage site by the by CLOCA, the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority. It is also part of the Lynn Creek watershed. Aside from the natural features, it is also has an incredible density of amenities that the town has been developing over the last 25 years. And there is a 2.5-kilometer trail that circumscribes the entire perimeter of the site, allowing visitors to walk through each of these amenities. So we start with world-class baseball diamonds, dog park, multiple playgrounds, one a fully accessible playground, as well as a skate park, the facility itself, and then of course the natural heritage, the meadow marshland that is around the circumference of the site. For the fairground itself, we are talking about that meadow that is south of the recreation center, and for size, we have about 5 hectares of space, which is 12 acres. And before I dig into the details of the study, I wanted to share or highlight the 3 priorities that underlie the work and were developed with staff while we were looking at the possibilities of the site. And these priorities were: 1, develop a multifunctional place that serves both extraordinary community events and day-to-day use. 2, protect the existing meadow marshland. And 3, improve and enhance the existing features of the site. And so to start off, we worked with the staff to establish the functional program that a large event might take. And we looked at, of course, where they are being held right now at Ajax Downs. There are many advantages of this site. Obviously, there is the large open space, which in contrast to ARC is a little bit bigger. It's 6.4 hectares compared to the 5 hectares at ARC. It has a feature stage, which remains there year-round, and it has a natural delineator of the space, which allows staff to limit or have control of people who access the site. It also has a very large parking lot, which is about 6 times bigger than the ARC site, with lots of room for not only parking, but shuttle buses, which the events still rely on to get people to and from the site and to limit congestion. And then the final advantage is the separate access road on the west side, which allows event staff as well as emergency vehicles to access the site separate from the public traffic. The one big disadvantage that staff pointed out to us was a bottleneck because there is only a single connection between the existing parking lot and the fairgrounds. So there is usually a traffic when major events are exiting. We also looked at the existing site with the staff. We walked through the site, looked at what was working and what wasn't. We placed scaled modules of what would be needed to set up a site just to see the kind of spaces that would be created. And so with this kind of information, we used it to frame the design concept for the study. And essentially, this is a diagram that describes how it might be organized. The main fairground space would be at the center of the site with a focal point, a multi-use plaza at the north end, close to the existing buildings for direct connection. And this green space, which we call the green, is surrounded by two loops. The first being the infrastructure loop. That's would be providing power and lighting and vehicle access to the green. And then the second loop, which would be more of a landscape loop, allowing that kind of controlled access to the site, as well as a buffer zone to protect the existing or adjacent meadow marshland. To the side of the main space, we have a smaller scaled space that we imagine would suit the sensory zone for a fair. And then finally, main access to the site would be off of the parking lot, as well as added public access off Audley Road, so that we give the staff and operational staff many options in terms of how traffic might be controlled with the public. And then finally, we would be taking advantage of the existing driveway, to create a operations compound near the southwest corner of the site. So developed as a design, this is what it might look like. You can see here the green is big enough for a cricket field, which is a great advantage, I think, of bringing more amenity to the site. The multi-purpose plaza here at the north end being the focus of that green, surrounded by the infrastructure loop, as well as a landscape berm loop, protecting and maintaining the existing path that already exists on the site. And then on the west side here off Audley Road, an area for shuttle buses and shuttle pickup and drop off, as well as bicycle parking and that operations area with a new building to support the running of events as well as maintenance of the park. And for a major event like Canada Day, and right now the size of this site would actually be able to accommodate a growth of events. So 15,000 being your typical visitor number. There is enough space, we believe, for up to 18,000 people. So there is room to grow in this scenario. And the main stage would be located at that north multi-purpose plaza with a vendor production compound here. All of the features of that event would follow the infrastructure loop and somewhat plug into the loop. So we have food trucks here, secondary stage, vendors and sponsor area, inflatables, as well as portable washrooms. And then to the side is the landscape park area with smaller scaled spaces, lots of trees and landscaping to create a separate, different experience from the openness of the fairground green. And then finally here is the new shuttle bus zone, which allows space for 6 shuttle buses to wait and drop off people, as well as parking for bicycles. We actually have a few locations at each of the main entrances to the site. And then, of course, the event compound or the operations compound. So I want to walk you through how all of this might be built, the site infrastructure to support the event space. We are looking at leveling the site to create a level ground for the fair event space. And that means taking the existing mounds, which are currently an issue for maintenance, and regrading this site so that it's flat and more usable. We're also taking that excess dirt and creating the berm that surrounds that green. And we did an initial study with our civil engineer, which indicates that we can design this to be a balanced cut and fill exercise, meaning that we would not have to export or import extra soil or fill to create this landscape work. We talked a little bit, or I talked a little bit about protecting the meadow marshland. We would maintain the stormwater management strategy that we got permission from CLOCA to install or to develop the site. And that means directing any stormwater on the site to the irrigation pond as well as the adjacent marshland. We would follow with the maintenance compound buildings. Sorry, I hope that's not in the way. Down here with its own parking lot and driveway. The infrastructure loop with power and electrical would be connected to the existing garbage room at ARC 2. And power to the maintenance compound would come from the main electrical room in the basement of ARC 1. During ARC 2, we installed a water main in anticipation of the development of the south part of the site, and water would connect to that system to feed first the building and then the new site. And then finally, the sanitary line would have to connect to the main connection off of Audley Road at the north end of the site. So you can see here that what we've done is we've made all the plug-in connections to the existing infrastructure away from all of the existing amenities to avoid disruption. And this is what that site would look like during a Canada Day event. The focal point would be the stage at that multipurpose court with the ARC building as its backdrop. You can see in the foreground the infrastructure loop, which is covered in a reinforced sod so that trucks can drive on it. And there is the planted berm along the perimeter that defines that green space with food trucks in the distance at the other end of the loop. And then, of course, what we imagine is that each one of these amenities would have year-round use beyond just an event. For example, the multi-use court could be used as a base for removable mats for ice skating. And the sensory zone would be a beautiful landscaped park space that allows for people to spend time, and it's a separate kind of experience from the open field, which of course is underused now, but could become a sports field or recreation field. So now I think what we want to do is talk about what was important to us beyond just designing a fairground. Of course, this park is well loved, it's well used, and it is important that it maintain that kind of presence and place in the community. So when it isn't a fairground, it essentially looks like what it would as an event ground, except that the shuttle bus drop-off would be allowed to grow in so that the planting would merge with the planting of Audley Road. It was important that it didn't look or feel like an empty fairground. Site accessibility. The word accessibility is important on two fronts. First is we know that it is a priority for the town to maintain and provide inclusive accessibility. So everything for this fairground would be, of course, barrier-free design. And then secondly, the question about traffic management, about crowd control, and pedestrian circulation during major events. Day to day, we're talking about keeping the existing circulation and in fact enhancing the pedestrian trail by adding these new spaces, the parkland as well as the open field. truck access and maintenance vehicles would still be able to access as they do now. But zooming out for a major event, how do we get these major crowds of people to the site? The number of parking spaces at ARC is about 565, which is compared to 3,000 at Ajax Downs is quite small. So of course, beyond just driving to the site, we are going to have to look at multimodal means of getting to the site. Shuttle buses would be one, and we would propose that we study several locations to add more shuttle bus routes as well as places to drop off and pick up. And we would want to encourage and reinforce other ways of getting to the site, like bicycle trails and pedestrian ways. And then when you're on the site, again, making certain that the traffic modes do not overlap to limit traffic, as well as providing multiple ways to access the site so that bottlenecks do not occur. This would be some work that we would want to do in the next phase to really study more what the implications are. What are the next steps? Planning for flexibility, and how do we design for it? The first thing is, of course, project budget. I've shown you the big idea, but I think what we need to think about are the essential components. What will make this project work? And that will allow us to determine what a base project budget might be. So the essential moves of the design are regrading the site. So create a level field, and then using that excess soil to create the landscape berm to contain the field as well and define the field, as well as creating a buffer zone between the experience of the open field, the walking trail on the other side of it, as well as the meadow marshland. And then secondly, making certain that we create multiple access points to the site. So not only having the north ones from the parking lot, but figuring out a way to create access off Audley Road for the public. And then finally, making certain that we do create a space, if not a building, but a area for maintenance and operation event staff to use to stage the event. We talked a little bit about the infrastructure loop. I think as a base move, what we would want to do is locate plugins to the existing building for these amenities close to the building. And as we move forward to the schematic design, what we would want to, or what we would recommend, is including options that develop from these base ideas so that we can get unit prices for the costs to help council determine priorities. And that base plan with those essential moves is worth somewhere around $4 million. And our recommendation would be to develop a schematic design as I described with the base moves plus some options and to obtain a more detailed Class C cost estimate to confirm what the value of this project might be. There are some issues, as Dave mentioned, that we need to consider moving forward because we do not want to jeopardize the development of 2 other projects on the site. The first is the Audley Road overpass, which I understand has about a 10-year horizon. So that means Audley Road would be raised 8 meters so that cars can drive over the railroad, meaning that there will be regrading that happens along Audley, and there will be a slope between Audley as it goes up and the fairground elevation. The second project would be ARC Phase 3, of course. So the implications of that are that right now we are proposing 3 ways to access the event site, and we would have to reconsider where the shuttle bus drop-off and pickup area would be once Audley Road raises. Of course, we can locate permanent features away from that slope, so that moving the shuttle bus area would really be just a landscape project. And then with the ARC Phase 3, you can see how the footprint of the building as well as the parking would take up about 25% of that open field. Now, it would eliminate the possibility of a cricket field. However, the infrastructure that would be part of that of the event space would not be diminished. It would still remain usable. And so, as Dave mentioned, we're talking here now about smaller events, probably similar to what you are already doing at Audley, but with the benefit of having made this southern property more usable and functional for the community on a day-to-day basis. So next steps after concept design is, of course, schematic design, and we would recommend the following 8 steps to move forward for council to consider. The first group are about confirming the design and the program. So 1, confirm the level of design accommodation that will be required for future projects on the site. As I've spoken about, Audley Road Overpass and ARC Phase 3, how much do they overlap and how significant accommodation should we consider? 2, develop and confirm special event requirements along with the development of the schematic design. So really confirm beyond just Canada Day, what other kind of events should be held here, what kind of accommodation should we think about, as well as day-to-day events, so day-to-day programming that ARC and park staff might have for this site. 3, determine metrics to meet the town's sustainability goals. So this project would follow, of course, the Ajax Green standards, but to what tier should this project think about, and what level of leadership would the town like to take with development of this project? The next set of recommendations are about getting more analysis on the site, and this would be about finding out as much information as we can to mitigate risk during design as well as construction. So 4, procure technical analysis of the existing site, including a site survey and a geotechnical investigation of the subgrade conditions. 5, commission a full traffic management study to confirm recommendations for special event traffic control, transportation, and parking requirements. And 6, obtain a Class C cost estimate at the end of schematic design to confirm the construction budget. And that, as I mentioned, would and should consider the design in terms of options and level of development. And then finally, the final 2 recommendations are about feedback. So first, obtain feedback from local authorities having jurisdiction, including town planning, the Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, and emergency services prior to advancing further to determine any concerns they may have. And then 8, the last recommendation, and probably the most important, is engage with the community to obtain feedback about the concept design. This will help us guide the schematic design and the direction that the project should move in. So that is the feasibility study as a short summary, and I would be happy to answer any questions as well. Maybe send it back to Dave in case I've missed something.
Thank you, Ms. Ng, for your vast presentation. Going to our speakers list once again, to members of council, if you wish to speak, use your request button. First up, we have Mayor Collier.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ms. Ng, and thank you for your presentation. This is not what I envisioned when I brought this forward a few years ago. I wonder, your last slide, I find it a bit ironic. Points 7 and 8 are obtain feedback. However, there was no consultation with council on this, and I'm wondering why. Because if there was, maybe this would look more like what I had envisioned.
I'm sorry, maybe I will let Dave answer that one.
No, I think through the chair to Mayor Collier, I just wanted to stress the point that this was really just a high-level feasibility study that was intended to look at the potential of the Audley Recreation Center and its potential to be a future fairgrounds. We recognize that because we're at such a conceptual stage, that there needs to be the appropriate consultation sort of at a later phase. But like we do with most projects or studies such as this at a staff level, we look at determining that feasibility and making the determination prior to moving to next steps. Because of the funding, because of the nature of this project, we are bringing it forward to council at this point in time, and our expectation is that we would have a full consultation process. But at this point in time, this is really just about the general feasibility of it, of the project at the Audley Recreation Center.
Well, that's not the impression I got from the presentation, Mr. Meredith. From the presentation, going through the next steps, it's all about design and all these other things. When this came forward, I envisioned using an underutilized town asset, the piece of land, creating, well, first of all, are you familiar with Harris Park in London, Ontario?
I am not.
Okay. Just do a quick Google map of it. It's basically a longer, thinner stretch than what we have here. It's been used for the last 2 decades for events such as Rock the Park, which is, I think, now up to a 5-day event. It's a park. It has some lighting, it has some electrical, but it does not have a $4 million price tag. That is more what I was envisioning for this space, somewhere for when Ajax Downs is redeveloped, which is imminent. The application's already in, and we will lose access to that space where we can hold outdoor events. It's not going to cost us a lot of money. It already has parking there, 500 something spots. And I envision the parking at the GO station and at Ajax Downs to continue with the shuttle service. Totally agree with the multimodal transportation piece of this. But didn't include a maintenance building, didn't include, all the other things that are here. So given that, and I won't speak for the rest of the council, but I know none of us, we all know that there's not a $4 million, it's unfunded. And I don't know what we'll have to bump to do this. What would be the next steps should we turn around and say, yeah, this is what we're looking for, send it back to the drawing board? I could have probably saved us the time and told you the feasibility study, it's needed. What would be the next step going forward? Because I don't think this is it.
The next steps from a staff perspective is we would work with the existing site conditions. As you mentioned, and as we acknowledged, we did host Winterfest earlier this year. We have a good understanding of how we would set up the existing site based on current conditions and hold such an event. There would be some ideally upgrades that we would like to see with respect to electrical and to improve some lighting and some power capacity, but we would work with the existing conditions on site to host those events. Our concern would be in and around a Canada Day where we would have upwards of 15,000 people and the potential for this site to accommodate that number. We feel comfortable sort of in that probably 8,000 to 10,000 range in terms of what we could accommodate based on current site conditions. The feasibility study was really just looking at if we were getting into larger numbers, that the site would be constrained based on the 2 basically mounds or hills that are occupying approximately 25 to 30% of the site. So we would still work with the site, we would still host special events at the site, but we would just be limited to some of those larger scale events and being able to accommodate it here.
Okay, that doesn't really answer my question. I don't want to see this delayed another year. I don't want to see it, you're talking about design in 2024. That means we're not going to have anything here till 2025 earliest, basically. That doesn't work for me. I don't know if that works for council. Again, I thought this was something that we could move on fairly quickly. I understand that large mounds of earth will need to be moved. I would like the opportunity to sit down and give some direction on how this could work. Like, for instance, I won't consider anything that has throwaway costs. So building infrastructure in the footprint of Audley Phase 3, to me, is a non-starter. Having the stage projecting from Audley south when there's residential, I mean, to me, the stage should be along Audley Road projecting west for sound. I don't understand why the shuttle would drop off at the Audley entrance and the cars would enter at the other, and people would enter from two directions when the shuttles could drop off in the parking area, not create a separate shuttle area and take up more space, and only have one access to the site. Today is the first I've heard of an Audley Road overpass. Well, I think we thought about that before, and it was a $10 million project 10 years ago when we said, no, we're not going to consider it. I mean, there's so many questions here. I just don't know where to go, Mr. Meredith.
Yeah, and I don't want to give the, if, again, depending on council's direction today, we still have the ability in 2023 and 24. We're not pushing off a design exercise and saying no special events at this location. Mr. Vita can add comments if he would like to, but our plan would be to still schedule the appropriate events at the Audley Recreation Center in 23 and 24, and look to move forward on that basis. Just wanted to emphasize, when you talked about phase 3 and throwaway costs, there are virtually no throwaway costs that we would be looking at. 75% of this budget is strictly the removal. It's a grading exercise to remove the mounds of dirt. That cost is going to be incurred through the phase 3 development. So we're not looking at those throwaway costs at all. We'd be looking at tying into the building from a servicing perspective, as I previously mentioned, which is in part of why the stage is located where it is, to keep some of those servicing costs, to keep the electrical runs, to keep the infrastructure costs down by locating it in proximity to the building. So there has been a lot of thought in terms of the various stakeholders and managing the costs. The biggest cost, as I mentioned, though, is creating the platform by removing the mounds of dirt. And that's really three of the $3.9 million. And I just wanted to reiterate that those are not throwaway costs. So again.
I guess I was talking about the plaza area, I think it was referred to, that's to be built. So if I understand what you're saying, a bulk of the 4 million, call it 3 maybe, is to do with the regrading, which will be captured as part of the phase 3 expansion costs anyway.
Correct.
So the true cost of what's before us would be about 1 million in addition to what is already in the long-range capital forecast.
Correct.
Okay. Now, part 2 of the recommendation is that staff be authorized to consider the detailed design for the proposed Audley Rec Center Fairground as part of the 2024 capital budget. What is the cost of the design?
If I was to, if we did say 10% of a construction cost, so 10% of 4 million would be 400. That's probably on the high side, but it'd be into a couple $100,000 from a detailed design perspective.
And, you know, we've already done our budget for this year. I would have liked to have seen the design included for this year, and so we could get moving on the implementation in 2024. Is there an option to, I guess it would be a non-budgeted, this might be a question to the treasurer, if we wanted to move this into 2023 for design?
Through the chair to Mayor Collier, yes, it would just be an unbudgeted capital account.
Okay, but if it's an unbudgeted capital, really, that's not going to have any effect on the budget as a whole. It's capital, we're just moving it from one year to another. The money is in reserve?
Through the chair, money is in reserve. We do have money in reserve that could fund this.
Okay. So if, and I think I may make that amendment as part of the 2023 capital budget, but I want to hear what my colleagues have to say first. But when it talks about the detailed design, Mr. Meredith, can you please speak to what that means as far as council involvement? Because I think we all have sort of a vision of what this is going to look like, and I certainly want to give some input. And I think I've already stressed I'm disappointed that We haven't given any now because we could be further ahead, I think, if we did.
Through the detailed design process, we would involve consultation, and that would involve each member of council providing that opportunity to provide their input. So that would be part of the process.
Okay, and how long would the design take?
We would be able to complete it before we would need to submit capital budgets for 2024. So I think that's what council would want to see. If there is any cost implications, that it would be considered by council as part of the 2024 budget. So just backtracking the dates, we're probably talking a September timeframe.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Meredith. Thank you, Ms. Singh. Mr. Chair, can you please add me after everyone else has spoken, and I'll make that amendment, please.
Yes, I shall do that. Ms. Ng, did you want to, I see you're there. Did you want to respond back to some of the mayor's queries, comments? Or we have a speaker's list, but I have been advised that maybe you want to speak, or?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair to Mayor Collier. I just wanted to address the acoustics. The stage is located facing southward, so the sound would be towards the railroad as opposed to facing west, which would be to the closer to the residential areas. I just wanted to provide that clarification.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you for that. I think the mayor was saying that he wanted the stage along Audley with it facing east, but I digress. Moving on to our speakers list, next we have Regional Councillor Marilyn Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question would be around the berm that was talked about. Is the berm used as a buffer at all for sound?
In a couple of parts. It is in part used for sound, and it is also used as a physical barrier that identifies the actual event space. So it would be an area that would be able to be more naturalized. There'd be tree plantings sort of within that area, so it would define the space. So it's a physical demarcation, but it would also provide some acoustical benefits by retaining sound as well.
So just over the summer, we dealt with an event in a vacant lot in the summertime, and the noise traveled clear to Whitby. So I have some concerns about the sound, especially how that's located and how that's maintained, how that's handled. Also, this isn't really considered a vacant lot, correct? Like, do you have servicing already? Like, I'm just thinking of all the issues that I dealt with that was water supply, food vendors, proper, if you go down that road with food vendors, you need electricity and refrigeration and then toilets and like is that all considered to be used as part of the ARC, like inside, or is there a separate part of that?
So a couple components to that. The infrastructure that's been laid out in the concept plan recognizes where the existing services are and really tries to put them in a practical location, but at the same time minimize those costs. So where we have food vendors and trucks where they may require generators, they may require some power. They are located along the easterly edge in close proximity to the building, just like the stage where there's any power implications. Where there's a need for water, again, we do have those services in the building so that they are short distances and short runs to provide those connections. So we did have that, sort of first and foremost in mind, was to try and manage and reduce those infrastructure costs to extend those services.
Right. So the overpass on Audley, did we do that? Like, I have like no recollection of that at all.
From my recollection, the Audley Road overpass has been in the transportation master plan and in our DC background study for somewhere between 10 and 20 years.
Okay.
Like, it's not something new. It's something that my recollection, I think it's even in the region of Durham. I shouldn't say that. I think it's in the region of Durham official plan. I'm not 100% certain, but for certain in our DC background study and our transportation master plan, it is.
Okay. Oh, shoot, I had one more question. That, should have wrote it down. Okay, I'll go on, thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Regional Councillor Sterling Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I do share the mayor's concerns of, some of the infrastructure having to be redone per se. Like, Audley is a good example. Right now, it's one lane on each side. Maybe not now, but in the future, will it ever be 2 lanes on each side? Is that ever going? Because we seem to be expanding every other road, major road in Ajax and Durham region. Would Audley ever be extended to 2 lanes on each side? And if so, would these plans have to change because of that?
With respect to the plans changing, no, the plans would take into account, there would be a certain right-of-way that Audley Road is, and I would need to confirm with our planning and development group from a transportation perspective to ensure that we have the appropriate right-of-way. But based on the classification of road, I believe we would have a right-of-way that would allow for it based on need to expand to 4 lanes. I'm not sure if Mr. Romaneski has any information offhand, but it's something we could definitely confirm.
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Lee, I don't have exact dates or the timing of any of these widenings, as Audley, for the most part, has been redone within the last 5 to 7 years, for the whether it was development adjacent to the right-of-way or just capital improvements, especially along the southern leg of Audley down to Highway 2. But we do have enough right-of-way width within that corridor to accommodate that future widening, so that's been taken into account as developments occurred through that corridor. As for the timing, definitely can follow up with you on that,
Sure.
based
And
on
obviously it's
that
urgent
information.
in the least, but and ultimately, as per our previous discussions earlier in this meeting, I think the consultant had 565 spots at the Audley Rec Center. I go there pretty much daily. I don't think we have 565 spots there. Am I wrong?
That's the accurate parking count.
So you're saying, in theory, I could park 565 cars in that lot?
That's what the site stats indicate.
Let's line them up, then, you and I. No, that's fair enough. But I mean, like, a good example is, Winterfest this year was at the Audley Rec Center. Not even like, I wouldn't even say it's one of our flagship events like Canada Day or Pumpkinville in terms of traffic. But I just know from, as someone who went there, it was absolutely like packed. And I can only imagine if we have larger events, like how we can accommodate that. And I think the answer you'll give me back is the busing and other things, but it is a point of concern versus Ajax Downs now, where we have, looks like almost 7 times as much parking available. I guess that's a question. Just like, well, like if we do go through a version of this plan and we don't add parking, how do you expect to accommodate the 15,000 we could in theory put here?
I think when we look at any location in Ajax from when we had these types of events and had 15,000 people along the waterfront, there were a variety of locations and approaches as it relates to parking. So one was the physical parking spaces. The second that we did not have at Winterfest, there's no shuttle service for Winterfest this past year either. So in speaking to recreation, the shuttle service is a critical element to the future success of any special event. So recreation and culture operations and our internal team would obviously promote and advocate and ensure the appropriate shuttle system was in place, that there's the appropriate parking locations for that shuttle service to move to and from the site as well. I think there is a good active transportation network in terms of the use of bicycles to the site, whether it's the Audley Road Trail, whether it's the Taunton Road Trail, bike lanes along Williamson. The site is very accessible from from the active transportation investments that we've made over the years. Audley Road and Taunton Road are 2 transit lines as well, so the site is well serviced with public transit. The one other aspect that would need to be considered from an overall traffic management or parking perspective is the utilization of Audley Road. As you may or may not recall, during Pan Am, Audley Road north of, I believe it was Rushworth up to Taunton, was in fact closed and was utilized for parking, ensuring emergency access could be available for entry to the site. So there are a number of different options, and you do have the advantage of along a portion of Williamson to the turning circle where you essentially have lots that are reversing onto Williamson itself. So there is some road capacity that we could take advantage of that we've had experience with Pan Am in using as well. So it would really be a multifaceted approach that we think this site could be as good as any in terms of accommodating the various demands and modes of transportation to the site for a large scale special event.
Okay. My last question is ultimately, I'm very poor visually trying to picture what I see on paper versus the reality. If RibFest becomes one of our events through our Ajax Rotary, are we saying like we could facilitate those big trucks to navigate around into the food area that would be designed that would work for us? Because generally they have big rigs, right? It's like 4 or 5 big rigs that go through, set up, and then they grill from there. We could do that with this plan?
With this plan, we've identified up to 10 of those large scale, whether it's a concession, whether it's a big rig for a RibFest, that would be accommodated. And when Missing referred to the infrastructure loop, it's sort of a reinforced sort of path that would, if you had wet conditions, that you're not going to have vehicles or those larger RibFest trucks sort of being stuck and destroying turf. So there is an area that has been identified as really at the extension of the parking lot. If you extended that south along the easterly edge, that would be planned for example, a RibFest. But that has specifically been taken into account through the conceptual design. So it's been accounted for.
Any plan that brings RibFest to Ajax, I am 100% down. So thank you very much for answering that question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Next up, we have Councillor Henry.
Thank you, through the chair. Councillor Lee asked some of the questions I was going to ask, but I'm going to move on to a few others, which is with regards to accessibility. And through the chair, looking at the plan that was presented before us and the shuttle bus drop-off, my question would be the accessibility from the shuttle bus drop-off to the actual staging area. And is that an upgrade hill walk? Who could answer that for me?
Responding from a conceptual perspective, there is a slight grading change from the central portion of the site towards Audley Road. Obviously, any design that we would move forward with as it relates to shuttling or public transit or accessible parking spaces would be in line with all accessibility codes and requirements. So, ensuring that we've got the appropriate grades, the appropriate materials to ensure the safe access from individuals with any form of disability, that they would be able to access the venue. That would be sort of a cornerstone of any design that we would move forward.
And out of the 565 current parking spaces that are available, because you would be adding this additional space, would you be adding accessible parking spaces towards the east side of Audley, towards where this venue where this space would be? Accessibility parking spaces, would you be adding to that to accommodate for those that came in vehicles and wanted to be able to get out of their vehicles and go right to the space where the staging area was? And would they be able to access that staging area through that parking space that's already there, or would they have to walk along through the path and come down and around into the front of the staging area?
These would be all details that we would need to work with through the detailed design stage. So your comments are valid and they would need to be addressed through that process.
Okay, and with regards, through the chair, with regards to the shuttle bus drop-off, I'm noticing when you go online and you look at an on-site, on-street version, we have a large amount of space from the existing road, the right-hand lane going northbound, making a right turn into Audley at the first area. I'm noticing that we have a large amount of space from there to Audley Recreation Center. So are we saying that some of that space would be carved out, taken out, and that would be the shuttle drop-off areas?
Again, what would be shown right now is very high level and very conceptual. It's really the detailed design stage that will provide you that level of detail. sort of getting beyond sort of the conceptual stage, and it's difficult to be specific to answer some of those technical questions right now.
Okay. It's just, I have to agree with the mayor that where it's not looking like what I envisioned. And his comment on that point was dead on to me, that it's not looking like what I would think it would look like for this type of event, to house the amount of people that we need to house for events moving forward. I would like to make a comment with regards to anything that would bring cricket to that area is great, and anything that would eliminate it, I would not be in favor of. The added value of having a cricket pitch there is tremendous to the community. So I think all the rest of the questions have been answered that I would have had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Next, we have Regional Councillor Joanne Dice.
Thank you. I just had a few questions. Can somebody explain to me what exactly reinforced sod is?
It's like sod, but it's reinforced.
How? I don't know. To me, you're putting reinforced sod in around that main area for trucks to come on, so it's not really sod, is it? There's a structure underneath it.
So for example, when we've done, I'll use our permeable paving as an example, where we've had sod grow through it.
Dave, I'm
Sorry. I'll use our permeable paving spaces as an example, where we've had a plastic geogrid, sort of that is on a aggregate base, but at the same time allows sod to grow through it, so that you've got the structural reinforcement of that grid to handle traffic, but it's at the same time it has a green image as opposed to a paved asphalt surface.
So it wouldn't then mitigate any kind of vehicle fluid that's going into the ground there? I sort of, if it's something that you could lift up and take away and put down every event, I would think that you had some sort of barrier, but if it's left there, then that's not going to be the case.
It would be a permanent sort of installation in that particular area.
I also had a question about the berms as well. So it does mitigate noise to a certain extent, I would imagine. That's why they're being put in place. So are the berms to the west side, which is closest to the houses, are they going to be larger than the other ones?
Again, those are things that we would look at in the design stage. At this point in time, we've just conceptually sort of distributed the soil sort of around the perimeter. But those are things that we would take into account when we went through the design exercise.
So if this goes forward, then, and we, through the process with that, would we need a noise study done for that area?
There's not a requirement for a noise study.
Not a
sort of
requirement.
in this case, but it's something that through our consultants that we have taken a look at from a noise
Right.
perspective. So we would still comment and look at it from that perspective.
Okay. I guess also, my concerns are about noise. I have huge concerns about the noise. I live, not right next to the lake where we do a lot of waterfront events, and I can hear Rotary Park, somebody on a microphone like they're talking to me in my backyard. And it's sound travels in different ways and unexpected ways. I think the capacity for 18,000 blows my mind, and I know you're looking at 8 to 10. But even so, that's huge number of people coming in for events. I think, we can't be everything to everybody. The other issue I have, you've got the shuttle buses on the west side as well. I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Canada Day celebrations in Pickering where they have fireworks. There will be hundreds of people waiting for shuttle buses. Hundreds. And it goes on for a long time after the event ends. So there's noise concerns there as well that I have. And also I wondered, I guess you can't answer this question either, but the fact that you're going to have stormwater management on site, are you talking about stormwater runoff sewers? Like what kind of stormwater management is going into that property?
Essentially, the stormwater network is in place right now. So what we're doing, in fact, is ensuring that the existing investment that has been made continues to function as it currently is. So we're not looking to add any new stormwater infrastructure. We're looking to leverage and take advantage of what is there and ensuring that how we design, how we grade the site meets the needs and sort of continues the stormwater management design that's in place to date.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Next up, we have for a second time Mayor Collier, and followed by Councillor Henry. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Great questions, everyone. And I'll just remind, just follow up on Councillor Leeds, we did hold a very successful Pan Am Games just to the north of this site in 2015 and managed the parking and the shuttle service and everything quite well. And I believe, I don't know the numbers, but it was a significant number. So I think this site is proven for being able to accommodate a venue such as this. I have an amendment I provided to the clerk. I'm not sure if we put it on the screen, please.
So there's a
I'll just.
Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, we have the recommendations. The amendment that I'm putting forward is to strike bullet 2 and replace it with that staff be directed to complete the detailed design for the proposed Audley Rec Center Fairground as an unbudgeted capital project in 2023 to be funded from, and I'm open to the treasurer here, but we put the capital contingency reserve. And if Ms. Valentin says that's okay, that could stay. Otherwise, we can replace that with where she feels is appropriate. And I would just like to speak to it quickly, Chair.
Absolutely. You have the floor.
Thank you. I look at this as a high priority project. I think there is enormous public benefit to this and would be a big asset to our community for a number of things. Councilor Lee correctly brought up RibFest. We know that there's applications already for Ajax Downs. We know we have a ticking clock and we need to get this moving because those lands will be developed. We're not going to have that venue to be used indefinitely, and we need to have something in place in a timely fashion. Otherwise, we're going to have several years of nothing and not being able to hold events like Canada Day, for instance, RibFest, other type of things. So this is why I'm moving the amendment to move this forward, get the design work done this year. I think it was mentioned it could be up to 400,000, but the wording was they didn't think it would be quite that high. So it's not really that big of a number. It's less than we're going to spend for that RFI. By doing that, this will allow us to consider this if we decide to go ahead in our 2024 capital budget. And so we can get shovels in the ground next year in a timely manner. So I'll ask for your support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Collier. Do we have any questions on the amendment? Sorry. Ms. Valentin, Director Valentin, if you'd like to speak.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I didn't see you there.
To answer Mayor Collier's question, yes, this unbudgeted project can be funded from the capital projects, capital contingency reserve.
Okay. Did you hear that?
Very faintly.
Okay. Just a reminder to staff, we're still working on the tweaks. Just speak directly into the microphone, but you were saying, Director, that we can do this?
That is correct. It can be funded from the capital contingency reserve.
Does that answer your question, sir? Yeah. Okay. All right. So are there any questions on the amendment from any member of council? Okay. So we'll now move by Mayor Collier, the clause to be amended. Please all vote. And that passes. Okay. Now on the balance, or sorry, on the amendment.
The motion as amended.
The motion as amended. Are there any questions on that? There being none, can we please vote on that? Okay, that passes as well. Thank you so much. Could we at this time, Madam Clerk, I think we discussed taking a brief recess, just 5 minutes or so.
Yes, that's in your hands.
Okay, can I get a mover? Just call friendly. Moved by Councillor Henry. I think we're all in favor. Okay, thank you. 5 minutes.
Through the chair, I present to you Army de Francia. She'll be preparing or providing presentation on the 2023 Transportation Demand Management.
Excellent.
update.
Thank you so much. If you could bend your mic down so you speak as closely to the mic as possible, that would be just maybe pull it down a bit. Yeah, excellent. All right, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. And today I will be presenting you the 2023 Transportation Demand Management Plan. So what is this about? Well, this is one of many plans that work towards shifting from a car-centric design and culture to a system that encourages sustainable modes of transportation. And why is that even necessary? Well, for one, car-centric design costs society more. If you see in this image, this is how much space is required to move 60 people using different modes of transportation. And cars take up quite a bit of space. And if you could see to the images in the middle and to the right, we have transit as well as walking and biking taking up less space than vehicles. There's also the risk of collisions that are created. For over half a decade, we've been creating our transportation systems, not just Ajax, but Ontario and Canada as a whole, that have prioritized the movement of vehicles. And what that has done is that it made things very difficult to get around our communities without a car. So what happens when you don't have a car? Well, it makes things difficult to access job opportunities, basic services, even health services, and a wide variety of needs. We're coming to realize that residents need more transportation options beyond the 9-to-5 commute. The novel coronavirus pandemic has taught us that there are people out there who work outside of these times, whether they be healthcare workers or custodial staff, or people who work at grocery stores, or even people who work at food banks, and even in some cases, Town of Ajax staff at our rec centers and other facilities. We spoke to a variety of residents as well as community leaders during this process. So I'd like to share a few quotes from these community leaders. It seems like transportation has been designed really for those who are commuting back and forth to work, but with no consideration for others that are not. And then we think workplaces are 9-to-5, but I've seen the evolution of workplaces that are beyond that. They have a lot of different shift environments that people are working in and even overnight. So where's transportation in terms of those type of services for late evenings as well as overnight or early morning? So that was from a community leader who provides food bank services. And here is from someone who works at a place of worship. Right now, there's a trend for using e-bikes. Everybody is going towards that technology because it's very easy to handle, it's very easy to drive, and it's cheap. So we should have something for the seniors, especially the e-bike thing, which really helps them and their mobility. We've also heard from residents that car-centric design can create isolation. In the 2021 census, it reveals that about 30% of the population is either under the age of 14 or over the age of 70. And those are ages where it's not ideal to drive, where you're not even allowed to drive if you're under 16, of course. And even if you take out the population of 0 to 4, that's still 25% of the population who's unable to drive. And that's an anticipated number based on age alone. That does not include people who are between the ages of 15 to 69 who may have a disability that prevents them from driving. And while there are people with disabilities who can drive, there are also many people who do not have the means, physical capacity, or other factors that affect their ability to drive. We've also done a survey recently, in 2022, and in the previous Transportation Demand Management update. And even though we have a lower response rate, given our staff capacity and our ability to do public engagement events, but based on those survey results, we found that the number of vehicles per household has actually been decreasing. So here's a quote from a group that serves young adults. I'm sure you've heard a lot of costs, but I know that's something I imagine is going to continue to rise. But that's one of the conversations I've had. You know what? Of course I can't own a car, but then transit is also very expensive. I can't purchase a bike. How can I get around aside from walking? And if I'm experiencing challenges that make walking difficult for me, then I just end up at home. One thing we've noticed is that folks are very isolated within Durham, very siloed. So that's why it's important to shift to a transportation system that allows for more options, not just driving. And TDM is one of those strategies towards that. So what is TDM? Transportation demand management is about demand-side solutions that encourage sustainable transportation. These types of solutions include technology, policies, incentives, as well as communications, which involve outreach and marketing and education. On the policy side, that's what actually helps to actually create something that encourages development and town facilities to have amenities that would help fill in those gaps. So we have the supply side, of course, and that TDM is not part of that. So supply side solutions include the frequency of transit, adding more buses, adding more bike lanes, adding more to the network. And yes, that's very important, but that's outside of that, and the town also has many plans addressing that. And there's also other jurisdictions who have plans working towards that. What TDM does is it fills the gaps, some of those gaps that can't be covered by that. So it's great to have the network and all, but when you actually reach your destination, you may need a place to park your bicycle or something that makes it more comfortable for you to walk to the entrance. So policies allow for that. And we have technology, which provides updates that will help users to readjust. And then we have incentives to motivate people to get outside of what their regular routines are. And of course, communications, outreach, marketing, and education to get people aware of what facilities are actually out there, what routes and services are actually out there, so that people can actually use them and they know that these alternatives actually exist. The first Transportation Demand Management Plan was in 2015, and here are the achievements that we've made since then. In 2019, we developed the Integrated Transportation Master Plan, which you may have heard a number of times. We engaged over 2,000 residents each year through a variety of community outreach events, and also by creating a variety of campaign materials. The TDM was good at creating a foundation for us to engage residents and to create that history. We also have a wayfinding strategy, and thanks to active TOA, we were able to implement 14 signs. We also installed 5 bike repair stations at the rec centers, as well as the Village Community Center and the waterfront. And we have over 1,000 bike parking spaces. So that helps in terms of end-of-trip facilities. So now we have the 2023 update. So what are we working towards now? The vision of the 2023 update is mobility choice that meets the needs and abilities of residents and visitors through a shift to sustainable transportation. Goal 1 is to improve mobility choice. Goal 2 is to build a culture of sustainable transportation. Goal 3 is to collaborate with stakeholders and community leaders. Goal 4, improve transportation equity. And Goal 5 is to measure and communicate the impacts of TDM. Here's what's included in the 2023 update. In the report, we talk about best practices, and we also talk about feedback from residents and stakeholders. We actually did a lot of deeper engagement with a variety of community leaders to better understand residents' needs. And we used what's called a social climate analysis, which is basically a community engagement method that involves using focus groups and really trying to understand not just what the needs are, but also to understand what efforts have been made at the community level and what strengths could help the town move forward. We also have more inclusive bicycle parking guidelines. There's this misconception that people with disabilities cannot use bikes. In some cases, that might be the case, depending on the disability, but there are a variety of bicycles that can be used by a variety of different types of disabilities. And our bicycle parking guidelines are now more reflective of that. We also have updated development guidelines and a 5-year action plan, which I'll go through later on in this presentation. So what was our methods? First, we reviewed best practices. As I mentioned, we did a social climate analysis with community leaders. We looked at the Transportation Tomorrow data, Transportation Tomorrow survey data, as well as the census. We conducted a survey and did a couple of agency meetings, so meeting with town staff as well as the region and the school boards and DRT, Metrolinx. We had a few pop-up booths in all 3 wards. So at the Ajax GO Station, McLean Community Center, at a local mosque, as well as the Lighthouse Retreat, and we did a virtual public open house in January. So this is what came up. Of course, many residents brought up concerns related to the supply side, notably transit service. So, and in some cases, biking as well. So priorities for transit and active transportation are building more bike lanes, improving cycling safety. In terms of transit, increasing the frequency of buses, route directness, improving connections to the GO train, expanding transit and adding more stops. In some cases, the removal of transit stops were actually quite detrimental for a number of folks. I recall in some of our interviews that there were DRT bus stops near food banks that were removed, and that made a huge impact for many of our residents. For the stakeholders, some of the recommendations they made was improving walking and cycling to the Ajax GO Station and providing active transportation amenities. On the demand side, so this is much more related to TDM. And what residents brought up was improving bicycle storage, notably weather-protected bike parking, making bike wayfinding signage and maps more accessible, supporting bike skills and community education programs. And from the stakeholders, we noticed that there's interest in encouraging walking and rolling to school, at least from the region. And there's interest in enhancing partnerships among different agencies as well as at the community level between institutions as well as the community level. There is interest in integrating TDM into policies, processes, and programs, and coordinating with developers to provide information encouraging new residents to use sustainable transportation modes. So what's the difference between the previous TDM plan versus now? Well, before, the actions were developed based mainly on precedents from other municipalities, and it focused on the 9-to-5 commute. What I found to be quite interesting is that it was very deficit-based, so there was a lot of discussion on what the town lacked. And there was also the discussion on how the town could meet widely known principles and best practices at the time. But the main strength of the 2015 TDM plan is that it's created a track record for resident engagement as well as development requirements. So that's why we see residents more engaged. That's why we see residents with an interest in sustainable transportation. And that's also why we do see amenities like bike parking available at a number of town facilities. So 2023, we have more clarity and less jargon. We have a better sense of what TDM is and how it fits into the number of other plans out there to encourage sustainable transportation. And there's greater consideration to community and staff strengths and assets instead of just looking at what we don't have. It actually looks at what can help us to move forward and what we should keep and continue to build on. There's more consideration to people with disabilities. There's a greater emphasis on equity and a diversity of trips outside of the 9-to-5 commute. And it builds on past as well as existing work among different teams. So there's a lot more synergies in the 2023 update. Included is the updated bicycle parking guidelines. So as I mentioned, there's a variety of different types of bikes. And one barrier to biking is that some people want to carry a certain number of stuff, which can be hard to park at certain places. So that's why we provide guidance on that. We also provide guidance on people who bike with a stroller in the back, as well as for people who may use a wheelchair who use what's called hand cycling. So there's guidance on that as well. There's a whole variety of types of bikes out there, and now we have guidance on how to accommodate for those different types of bikes. I feel like I could make this into its own separate presentation, but community strengths is something that we really looked into to develop the actions for the 23 TDM plan. And there's a lot to acknowledge that there's a lot of undersung heroes in this community, is what I'm trying to say. There are people who have delivered thousands of meals to people during the pandemic, and there are organizations out there who work together to provide rides to seniors and people who do not have access to vehicles to essential services. We have people who have worked with us to engage residents, to also help promote biking and to help with bike repairs. We have school champions out there who have organized bike rides as well as group walks, even in less favorable weather conditions. And more recently, we have our Active School Travel Toolkit with very inspiring stories from youth right here in Ajax. And I highly encourage you to check out those stories when you have the chance. So using those strengths, using all that information that we have from the survey responses, as well as from the existing literature out there on updated best practices, that's how we created the actions. So these actions are much more informed by resident needs, as well as new and coming trends. Our actions could be divided into 4 parts. So we have foundations, partnerships, town policies and practices, as well as transportation equity. So foundations, we have, first we have to make sure that we have the capacity to actually follow through with these actions. So we have actions to secure funding and create a communications plan, and also to provide an annual report to fulfill that last goal of evaluation and monitoring. The next is to keep building on those partnerships, those relationships with people at the community level. And that includes leveraging the Ajax Partnership Fund. It also includes working with the region, building that relationship, building relationships with transit agencies such as Metrolinx and DRT, and also exploring other ideas for providing different transportation options, such as car share, as well as shared micromobility. And for those of you who don't know, micromobility typically includes e-bikes and e-scooters. So for town policies and practices, so that's what actually helps us give direction. And this is what helps in particular with town facilities as well as development, new development. So we're looking at complete streets guidelines, how to allocate that space for different modes of transportation, bicycle parking implementation plan, parking policy reform, so looking how to improve the number of spaces allocated to cars, TDM and new development, as well as coordination with the integrated transportation master plan update. And last but not least, transportation equity. So increasing representation as well as building capacity and building upon the existing leadership at the community level. That includes an inclusive media library and building youth capacity in equity-deserving communities and engaging them, as well as investigating the feasibility of creating a bike library. And that is the Transportation Demand Management Plan update.
Thank you so much, Mr. Francia. Much appreciated. First, we have on our speakers list Regional Councillor Marilyn Crawford.
Thank you, Army. I appreciate your passion for active transportation. My one question is, will we be repainting some of the bike lanes that we have currently out there? Some of them are quite faded.
Through the chair, so bike lanes are actually outside of the scope of this project. However, we can work with
Dave
road
Meredith.
operations to.
Sorry.
Yes, we will.
Thank you. So maybe this is outside the scope of your project. I got a number of questions. The new Roslyn Road expansion, we got an email from the Durham Coalition, I think, for biking, quite upset about the fact that no bike lanes were included and that multi-use trails were going to be used. I know that this may be just an opinion and maybe outside of your scope, and I apologize, but multi-use trails don't work for e-scooters, bikes, and walkers. They just don't. And we need bike lanes. So I don't know, what is your opinion on that?
Through the chair to Councillor Crawford. So again, that is outside of the scope, and I have seen those concerns raised. To my understanding, the main concern is safety in terms of separating pedestrian volumes from biking volumes. And while the guidelines that we follow, or that the industry has to follow, particularly the Ontario Traffic Manual, has been updated, and it has provided recommendations on whether or not to provide a multi-use path versus a cycle track. So a cycle track is it's off of the road, and it provides us a separate path for people biking versus people walking. And the point I'm trying to get across here is that a multi-use path isn't necessarily obsolete. There are certain scenarios where a multi-use path may be more appropriate versus a cycle track. I can't necessarily speak to the Roslyn Road environmental assessment, but I imagine that there was consideration to the pedestrian as well as bike volumes in that area, as well as the land use that would influence that. And what's recommended in the updated Ontario Traffic Manual guidelines is to provide separation between pedestrians and cyclists on more popular areas where there's expected to be higher pedestrian volumes. And multi-use paths are considered to be okay in areas that have lower pedestrian volumes.
So my sister lives off of the Danforth, and I salivate every time I go down there. I know that all the residents hate it, but their bike lanes are amazing. I love what they've done, and it drives me, as a driver, it drives you crazy, but I do love their bikes. You talk about getting from place to place, and yet we have no storage at the GO train at Ajax. We did ask for it, it went to Pickering. So it makes it really hard for people to ride their bikes to the GO train as a destination place, which many want to, when they have nowhere to store their bikes. Just my point. I mean, I don't know, do we send another letter, or is that right off the table from Ministry of Transport? No, Metrolinx? Is it Metrolinx that does that guy? Yeah, Metrolinx. Like, we want people to use the bus. We want them to take their bikes there, but they have to have a decent place. And Pickering got an amazingly beautiful one, honestly. So I was really ticked about that. And as chair of transit, I will say too that what I found is when bus stops have been taken away, sometimes there's other routes that have been implemented that people just aren't aware of because they're used to the route that they've had. So they should reach out to find out what, because yes, there have been bus stops and bus routes taken away, but they do allow for other areas and different ways of getting to places. So they really should reach out and ask about that kind of thing. So if you ever get questions about that, I'm not saying I can get a bus route back, but maybe I can find a different way for them to actually get there, especially in a food bank situation. So anyway, those are just my comments. I know that, Dave, do you know anything? Can I, through you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
May I ask Director Meredith about the Roslyn?
Yes, if that's appropriate within this discussion. Sure, go ahead.
Oh, Roslyn bike lanes. Why did we not put bike lanes on Roslyn Road?
Typically, the design and construction would stem from the environmental assessment that would have taken place. So through the EA process, it would drive design and construction. So we'd have to go back through that, the terms of reference, the consultation process and the results of that. So I don't have an immediate answer other than the fact that it would have gone through an EA process.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regional Councillor Crawford. Next up, we have Regional Councillor Dyes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really very interesting, and I wanted to thank you also for the 30%, showing that, 30% of people in Ajax do not drive. Probably yes, there are some with disabilities that can't, but age was the other one we never think of, the young and the older, and also what we don't think about is affordability. So it really is a disconnect in our community. I'm wondering if, I went to an open house quite some time ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, where we had a young gentleman come from Toronto looking at condos. And his comment was, the younger generation who are moving into these intensification areas do so where there's a major transit road or a hub. And they do that because it's of affordability. So if you're going to pay a lot of money to purchase a condo or whatever, something else goes by the wayside, and that happened to be the cost of owning a car and paying for one on a monthly basis. And so I'm wondering, do you anticipate that we're going to see more people moving in with intensification that will perhaps be looking for affordability options of having a car or not?
Through the chair to Regional Councillor Dyes. Thank you for pointing that out, and thank you for pointing out the issue of affordability in terms of personal finance. I talked more about staff capacity, and I forgot to mention that as well. So population is increasing. We are expecting that to continue to happen, especially with new development. I can't put an exact number on the number of people who would come with the expectation that other transportation services may be available. But I know that we will continue our efforts to provide a variety of transportation options. And of course, given that housing affordability and the supply of housing is a concern, to my understanding, there may be a preference towards higher densities to provide that housing on the available land and space that we have.
Well, thank you. The other thing, too, that comes to mind, and with that intensification, I'm hoping that your department will be proactive in designing these high-rises or mid-rises that are going to include, businesses on the main level. And I think where there's a real opportunity to have repair shops, businesses operating that can support different transportation options in our community. And I think that's something we need in the car share as well, as I spoke of previously. I think we're getting there, and at what point, I don't know how we do it, but I hope that you keep on top of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Regional Councillor Dyes. Next speaker is Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Army, for the presentation, Mr. Francia. Very interesting, and yes, I agree. You are always very knowledgeable and passionate when you speak, so thank you for that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, or ask you to talk about, the shared micro-mobility pilot. I know there's lots of opinions in the town and in other areas. I know Toronto recently banned them, I think, or a couple years ago for safety. And you made a comment earlier to Regional Councillor Crawford that about you wouldn't recommend, I heard something about not recommended for lower pedestrian use, you would recommend certain transportations in lower pedestrian use areas. So my question would be, I know that there's a demo coming up on the weekend to discuss all of this, so maybe you can talk about all of that, but does your comment mean that the town would not be looking to permit those types of devices, say, at the waterfront?
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer. So what I was talking about earlier was whether or not to put a multi-use path versus a cycle track. And a cycle track, it's basically, the example is, it's in your ward. The one that we have is in your ward. It's on Lower Harwood, just approaching the waterfront.
Yep.
So you'll notice that separated from the road, there's a line, there's a white line that separates, and on one side, it shows a bike symbol, on another side, it shows a pedestrian symbol.
Yep.
So that's a cycle track. So a cycle track is recommended by Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18 for areas that have higher pedestrian volumes. And then for areas with lower pedestrian volumes, a multi-use path would suffice. So it was more related to that.
So,
And thank you for bringing up the micromobility project that's taking place right now. So as you mentioned, we are currently engaging residents to determine whether and where to permit e-bikes as well as e-scooters. So that will be presented to you in June.
okay. Okay, and do we have an existing bylaw regarding micromobility right now?
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer. So the existing bylaw on e-bikes in particular is that they are only allowed on town roads and not on multi-use paths or trails. E-scooters are very new, so there's not really a policy on that per se right now. Currently, they would not be allowed on multi-use paths or trails. The region passed a bylaw last April, a year ago now. So April 2022, roughly, that permits the use of e-scooters on regional roads. And recently, I think a few months ago, the city of Oshawa permitted the use of e-scooters on city of Oshawa roads as well as multi-use paths and trails.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. Is there any other questions? There being none, I have two. Hopefully they're quick. In regards to, I think two of them, Marilyn Crawford already touched on, Regional Councillor Crawford touched on, but the bike signals, which you said, which was good to know, separate pedestrian crossings from bike crossings, correct? So who's initiating that? I've gotten quite a few, so it's the region that's doing this? Like they're the ones initiating, we need them here, we need them there, they pay for them. Mr. Pandias, answer my question.
Thank you, Chair. So I think maybe Jeff and Dave could build on to this, but so far, some of the bike signals that have been installed were by the region. I'm not sure if some of them were put in by developers.
Again, I don't mean to be out of order. I'm the chair, but I see Mr. Pandia nodded to me that it is the region. That's really what I wanted to know. I don't know how important it is or how much money it costs, but I've had people say some different things about them, but it just seems like, we live in a very rich country to say, you get one for the cars, one for the pedestrians, one for the bikes. But okay, we'll leave that. And secondly, the bike lockers. Been an absolute passion of mine and Marilyn Crawford's since the beginning, since I've been here. And many residents asking and very confused. It seems like a very simple thing. So I always thought that it was under Metrolinx. It would go to the GO train. But when I see it in your report, and it's different, it seems a lot softer. It's almost like an enclosure with some plastic windows. Can you speak to that? Or are they coming? Or is it just a thought? Or does it actually belong to Metrolinx, the responsibility?
Thank you, Chair. So the responsibility is with Metrolinx. And I know that Council has made quite the effort to ask Metrolinx to try to get those secure bike lockers at the Ajax GO station. And I can hear your disappointment and frustration with the fact that it was given to a different municipality. So that is something that we did bring up to Metrolinx. That's something that we could keep bringing up in near future discussions.
Thank you. It's very important to us and would love to see this come to fruition within this council term. Okay, if there's no other questions, back to my trusty notes here. So this is a recommendation that the report entitled 2023 Transportation Demand Management Plan Update for the town of Ajax to be received for information, and that council endorses the Transportation Demand Management Plan for the town of Ajax prepared by WSP Canada dated March 2023. So we need to vote on this, receive for info and endorse the TDM plan. If we could initiate that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
You require a mover.
Oh, I require a mover. Yes. Moved by Regional Councillor Sterling Lee. His hand was up before you said that. I should have known better. And that passes unanimously. Thank you so much. Next up, we have our final agenda item. And we have our, yes, Jason. Sorry, I'm collecting my thoughts and notes here. I apologize. Privacy Risk Management Policy, right, by Mr. McWilliam, Manager of Legislative Services. You have the floor, sir.
If it's okay, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say a few words before Jason gets into his presentation.
Absolutely, yes.
Thanks. So this is an item that staff are bringing forward, and it may not be something that was on council's radar, so I just wanted to give a little bit of context for that. So just privacy generally in our privacy program, it's a program that lives in the LIS portfolio, but obviously applies corporately. And I'll just be upfront in saying that it's an area of our business that that has required more attention in recent years. And I mean, we've always had the main components of a privacy program in place. That is to say, we've had the elements that are sufficient to sort of meet our legislative obligations, but as we know, the world has changed really rapidly in the last few years, and while legislation and our obligations under it haven't necessarily evolved, the real world has changed a lot, and of course technology evolution has created new privacy challenges. The public's expectations and our own employees' expectations of how we collect and safeguard their information have evolved a lot, and so we need to rise to those new standards and the expectations that now exist. And it's sort of just our luck that Jason McWilliam arrived in Ajax, you know, at the moment in time that he did, because privacy happens to be his expertise. And so that's why we've been able to move this forward now and fill in some of those gaps. And in some ways it might have a little bit of an administrative flavor to it, but it's before you today because I think there is a growing public interest in privacy and how governments manage it. So that's why we're here with this today, and with that, I'll just pass it over to Jason. He has a short presentation on this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Cooper. So yeah, I'm here today to provide a short presentation on kind of what is a new privacy risk management policy, and kind of go over some of the contemplated changes to the town's privacy program that will result from adoption of the recommendation and the policy itself. So as Director Cooper was talking, I guess the real question is, why are we here now? So as noted in my report, municipalities for a long time have been responsible and accountable for protecting personal information, not only how it's collected, but also how it's used and safeguarded well in the custody of the organization. The Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act was put in place in 1990. And while it's been updated from time to time, it really, I think, at this point in its lifespan, really kind of fails to meet the expectations of society. It fails to respond to a lot of changes that we've seen in the technical sector. I mean, we're seeing kind of cloud, big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning. All of these new technologies have great promise for municipalities, but they do come along with their own sets of risks that do need to be managed. And so I think now is an opportunity for us to revisit kind of how we're doing things here at the town and try and meet those new expectations. Further, we've seen that privacy breaches and data breaches are kind of the sort of thing that we see day in and day out now. And certainly citizens, policymakers, and the general public are kind of coming to expect more of organizations who are collecting and using and processing personal information. Additionally, we have seen, for example, in Europe, in California, even here in Quebec, through the General Data Protection Regulation, the California Consumer Protection Act, and Bill 64 in Quebec, we really are seeing new standards being put in place. And they're empowering individuals to take more meaningful or exercise more meaningful control over their own personal information. These laws are now requiring organizations to assess and manage privacy risk explicitly, and they're imposing financial penalties on organizations that fail to adequately protect personal information. While financial penalties are not something that's currently in the Information and Privacy Commissioner's toolkit here in the province of Ontario, previous commissioners have called upon the government to begin to consider the implementation of financial penalties for organizations who do not comply with the requirements of the legislation. Further, these are important developments which influence the overall privacy landscape and are likely to be key features of any future privacy legislation that we might see here in Ontario. As an aside, it's not inconceivable to see that happen. In June 2021, the Government of Ontario put forth a white paper canvassing the public and private sector about the possibility of implementing a private sector privacy law here in Ontario. And one of the things that was actually contemplated in that white paper was the implementation or imposition of administrative monetary penalties and fines for noncompliance. So I think given that landscape, it's imperative that the town be considerate of these and contemplate these future changes that may come forward. Secondly, the town has in recent years pursued significant investments in cybersecurity and digital transformation initiatives. It's undeniable that these investments will improve the overall security of the posture of the organization and enhance the accessibility of the town's programs and services to the residents. But they also come with their own sets of risks that must be identified and managed. Establishing a robust privacy management framework, albeit adjacent to the information technology space, will ensure that we're thinking critically about how personal information and these solutions are used in our business processes. Most importantly, this will also ensure that we're proactively identifying and managing risks prior to implementation. So not looking back on what we've done and trying to shoehorn our solutions into some sort of risk management framework, but actually being proactive and trying to identify these elements and implementing the appropriate controls ahead of time. Finally, I've come to learn over the last 10 months that management here at the town kind of has limited insight into the nature and the extent of the privacy risks that we're taking on in the course of our business activities. This really results from the lack of an established and coherent methodology to assess, manage, and report risk. So certainly adopting the privacy risk management policy and implementing the changes that are contemplated will allow the town to more effectively govern, protect, and leverage what I think everyone would recognize as a critical organizational asset here at the town. So there's several elements to the policy or the program, and I've tried to articulate them in this really beautiful graphic that you see before you. First and foremost, I'm not a graphic designer, so this is kind of the best that I could come up with. But I'll certainly walk through each of the key elements that are contained therein. So a series of privacy principles have been articulated that serve as the foundation for our program. These are found on pages 420 and 421 of the agenda package. And where we encounter potential gaps in our policy or supporting processes, these will look to inform our decision-making and our actions. Importantly, we recognize that we are an organization on a journey to enhance our maturity in the privacy domain, and where we cannot immediately fulfill a principle, these will serve as goals to be achieved through ongoing program activities and continuous improvement initiatives. Secondly, supported by our foundational principles, a risk appetite statement has been developed to guide staff working with personal information or using data to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of town programs. We know that information is kind of the lifeblood of an organization and is critical to being able to improve the way we are doing things. However, we recognize that the organization currently lacks maturity in this space, but feel that it's important to position the organization for future activities and proactively articulate guardrails prior to the implementation of solutions which may leverage data sets containing personal information. To enable greater insight and management of privacy risks, privacy impact assessments are a new element which will be required to be completed prior to the processing of personal information. And when I say processing, I really mean kind of all aspects of things that the town does when we use personal information. So whether we're collecting it, whether we're using it, whether we're sharing it, whether we're disclosing it to outside of the organization, PIAs will cover all aspects of that life cycle. Additionally, they will also apply to our activities when it comes to onboarding third parties that may be accessing or have the ability to access this information in the course of our business activities. PIAs are intended to serve 4 key principles or purposes. First, it's to ensure that our proposed activities conform with stakeholder, legislative, and regulatory expectations, as well as our risk appetite and our foundational privacy principles. 2, they're intended to ensure that administrative controls and technical safeguards are fit for purpose. And so what I mean by that is they are addressing the key risks that are facing the organization, and they're effective in their application. 3, we want to ensure that there's management awareness and formal acceptance of inherent and residual risks. And so again, privacy impact assessments will be key in documenting or articulating what those key risks are and the residual risk that remains, and making clear that directors and others within the organization understand that the organization is comfortable taking on those risks. And then finally, they will provide evidence of our efforts to comply with our legal and regulatory obligations. So we know when privacy breaches happen, that the Information and Privacy Commissioner's Office has an interest in how the town is structuring our business activities and interested in the ways that the town has gone about managing risk and implementing the appropriate controls. And so these assessments will be key in that. The obligation to complete PIAs will rest with each business unit who is processing personal information, and privacy specialists and legislative services will assess and risk rate the activities and controls and safeguards implemented to minimize privacy risk. Next is kind of revisions to our incident and breach reporting processes. And so while we've had a privacy breach protocol in place for some time, there's some clear opportunities to improve the mechanisms that I've identified during my time here at the town. First and foremost, new breach reporting thresholds will be established to better align with practices currently in place in the broader privacy space. So historically, whenever a privacy breach has occurred, I think it's kind of been the town's process, or at least the process in the broader public sector, to really undertake notification whenever something happens. But we recognize, or at least it's becoming apparent in the privacy domain, that providing notification every time a breach happens might actually be doing more harm than good. So for example, if it's your name and your email address, are there meaningful ways that you can actually do something to minimize risk, or is there in fact any risk associated with disclosing your name and email address? And I think when we take a risk-based approach, I think a lot of us are probably going to conclude that, you know what, my name and my email aren't particularly sensitive. And so there's not a lot of harm that comes from the disclosure of that information. On the other hand, if you were to have your name, your contact information, your medical records, your credit card number, all these sorts of more sensitive pieces of information disclosed, I think we recognize that inherently there's far more risk that can come from the disclosure of that information. And so the town is really looking to take a risk-based approach and think critically about the circumstances where we're providing notification to individuals who've been impacted. So importantly, we're shifting from kind of notifying all of the time to notifying where there's a real risk of significant harm to the individuals who've been impacted. Secondly, responsibility for client, resident, or stakeholder notifications will now shift to each business unit within the organization. And legislative services and the privacy specialists in that area will remain responsible for interactions with the Information and Privacy Commissioner and other regulatory bodies. This really is intended to ensure that the people that are responding to client and customer and resident inquiries really have an understanding of the business processes that led to the breach. This isn't to suggest that legislative services will not still be involved. We will certainly support departments in responding to privacy breaches and helping them craft the appropriate messaging. But at the end of the day, like, we're trying to see like legislative services kind of take more of an incident response and investigative role rather than fielding those key inquiries from the public, simply because within legislative services, we don't really have like the capacity to respond to those inquiries, and we certainly don't have the knowledge of the day-to-day business activities that led to the incident that transpired. And so I think it's really kind of aligning responsibility and accountability to the areas that are best positioned to respond to customer and resident inquiries. And then finally, long-term, the program will look to develop key performance indicator and key risk indicator reporting to provide senior management with the information they need to assess and monitor the overall state of privacy risk management within the organization. I think the other benefit of kind of developing this reporting, it will also provide data and information needed to prioritize investments in kind of maybe technology, training, and other activities that may be required from time to time or where necessary. As well, throughout the entire process, there will be tailored training for staff who are called upon to participate in this revised program, and we will have ongoing communications to support the continued development of a culture of privacy here at the town of Ajax. And so with that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to respond to any questions that members
Thank you,
may
Mr.
have.
McWilliam, for your attention to this and the report. We have, first up, Regional Councillor Sterling Lee on our speaker list.
Thank you, Chair. So privacy is something that I've been speaking on for a few years now. Since we started opening up the conversation to, smart cities and security cameras throughout the town. So I'm very glad staff came up with this report. It's very comprehensive. So I guess one of my only questions ultimately was whether this would have any impact on the council code of conduct. Because ultimately, from a department side, if we go to department head, what if one of us were in breach of privacy? Like we accidentally sent an email list that we shouldn't have. What happens then?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think that would fall under kind of our existing privacy breach protocol processes that we have. And so if it was the sort of breach that required notification, certainly we would find a way to provide those notifications to those who are impacted. It's interesting, right, that you kind of pose council as a possible source where privacy breaches could occur. But I say that's interesting in that I've seen that in the past, that the council members can be the source of a privacy breach, and their individual members are just as accountable for the ways in which they use personal information in their business activities as we as staff are. So I think, I guess the observation I would make is, even if a council member was the source of a breach, we would work with the individual member and staff across the organization to investigate and respond to that breach and follow up as necessary within the context of our privacy program.
And then if there's any punitive measures, it'd be done through the integrity commissioner, I assume? Is that how we would kind of send them off?
Yeah, I think my observation would be, from a program perspective, that's not our focus. I mean, our focus is very much, we want to continuously improve the ways in which we are managing personal information. And we don't want it to be a punitive, we don't want staff or members of council to think, oh my God, I committed a privacy breach, I'm going to get fired. Or there's going to be some sort of punitive measure applied to me. I very much want people to be open and transparent and recognize, oh my God, I made a boo-boo. What's the next thing that I need to do? Oh, I need to notify legislative services, and they will work with me through that process. So I think it's very important that this is not seen as a punitive process that may result in the imposition of penalties or disciplinary action or anything like that. That may follow, but that is not the focus of our program. And where there is a need to involve others in the organization, then those decisions will be taken after an investigation is complete. We're certainly not starting from the outset trying to identify who did wrong and how are we going to hold them accountable. First and foremost, our intention is to actually improve the way that we are managing personal information. And if we find gaps in our processes or our policies, then our first step is actually going to be, let's improve those rather than kind of trying to assign blame to an individual.
And then my last question, Chair, thank you, is through third-party access. So at the region, we saw, I think my kid's SIN number was released because of his daycare application, to be honest. So how stringent are we going to be with third parties and restricting the amount of information they have access to? So smart cities is a good example. Bell ultimately, touts their smart city plan as a great way to, efficiencies and whatnot, but really it's just their way of collecting as much data as humanly possible. How are we able to mitigate the damage or the possible damage that would have on our constituents?
Yeah, through the chair. I think in those circumstances, it's really kind of going back to our foundational privacy principles and really thinking critically about what data elements do we need to share with a third party? What services are they providing to the town? And is the information that we are providing to them actually necessary in the circumstance for them to fulfill those, to deliver those products or services to us that we've engaged them for? So, I mean, every time that we engage a third party that's going to be looking to access or process personal information as part of our engagement with them, then we will be working with that vendor to identify what information are they going to have access to, and what are the controls that we're putting in place to make sure that they're using it as we've directed, pursuant to contractual clauses, for instance, and also making sure that the ways in which they are using that information align with the purpose for which we provided that information, as well as making sure that that aligns with the expectations of the individuals who've provided that information to us in the first instance.
Perfect. Those are all my questions. Thank you very much for the presentation and the policy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next on our speaker list, we have Councillor Lisa Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. Very interesting. Lots to learn here for me, for sure. I wanted to ask you to explain to me again the privacy impact assessment. Like, based on what I read, is it like a form that like if I register my kids for summer camp and there's all those forms, does that mean rec each time has to fill out a form?
Through the chair to Councillor Bauer. No, like the privacy impact assessment itself is actually focused on the business activity or the ways in which that personal information is being used by the department. So, for instance, let's say we're standing up a new program in our bylaw services area. And we know that the information that's going to need to be collected consists of name, address, driver's license data. Maybe we have to collect some additional information from a third party. Then we're going to be thinking critically about all the information that's required to run that program, what services that we are using to deliver that program to the community, and what sort of safeguards are being put in place to protect that information, both when it's being used by individuals here at the town of Ajax, as well as third parties that we may be engaging to support our business activities. And we will assess risk on a couple of different spectrums, right? So first, how sensitive is that information? Where is that information ultimately living? Is it directly within the control of the town? Are we relying on a third party to process or use that information in some particular way? How does the collection of that information align with the expectations of the public, of our legislative responsibilities, of regulators? And so we're thinking about it on a couple of different dimensions, and then ultimately assigning both an inherent risk rating to it, as well as a residual risk rating, taking into consideration all of the controls and safeguards that we're applying throughout that business process to manage for the risks that are being identified. And so right now, like we're setting the policy foundation for this program, and we will be working through the latter part of this year, working to develop exactly what is our methodology, what are the things that are critical to the town to assess risk on, and then we'll be building that in cooperation with staff across the organization. So it's a little premature for me to say exactly what it's going to be, but those are some of the considerations that will go into a privacy impact assessment process that we will implement here at the town.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That's it, Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have Councillor Henry.
Thank you, through the chair. Again, Councillor Lee asked the question I was going to ask. I think he's in my head tonight or today. But I will say I'm glad to hear that there won't be punitive repercussions you're not looking at that as far as this report is concerned. I myself have received a few emails since being here from staff members that were not meant for me. And I just alerted that staff member, hey, I think there was a mistake. And I wouldn't want to see, and I'm not going to say who it was, so don't ask. But I wouldn't want to see somebody get in trouble for something like that because it was not intended, you know. So I'm glad that that Councillor Lee touched on that point because I wouldn't want to see it go in that direction. That's basically what my question was, so thank you.
And through the chair, if I just might to Councillor Henry, it's been my experience that probably 99% of privacy breaches occur due to the human element. So we are humans, we know we make mistakes. And although we will do our best to kind of implement controls and checklists and safeguards, at the end of the day, we're still human, we still make mistakes. And I think that's why we don't want the program to be punitive, right? Like, we want people to be honest and be transparent when they've made a mistake and engage the right people in this organization who can support them and respond to those incidents if and when they occur. That's just kind of my observation. At the end of the day, we're working with people and people make mistakes.
Thank you again, Mr. McWilliam. Are there any other questions? There being none. Moved by Mayor Collier to approve the privacy risk management policy and to delegate authority to the clerks to make amendments to policy to keep it in line with best practices. And we are going to vote on that. Please stand by. Is that? We need, yeah, we just don't see it on our.
I need a yes.
We see the top shows the 6.3. There's no voting option.
Oh, no. I voted no. Can we just do a show of hands for this?
Yeah, moved by Mayor Collier, and all in favor? Those opposed? That carries unanimously. Old school on that one. And we're going to see the results, or that's it? Okay, just double checking. There is item 7. There is no closed session, so we're on to adjournment. Move by Mayor Collier. No, moved by Mayor Collier, and it's the last two. And all in favor? Okay, those opposed? That carries. Thank you so much for everyone's patience. Do we have to start again? No. Okay.
Sorry.